The river. Hold him. Hold him. Carter yelled, lunging, his wounded leg buckling. Williams didn't hesitate. He shoved Eleanor bodily into the freezing water. The shock was paralyzing, stealing her breath, the cold like 1,000 knives stabbing her skin. The current snatched her immediately, pulling her away from the bank, towards the center of the river where the water ran fastest. She gasped, choking on icy water, flailing wildly. Through water-blurred vision, she saw the desperate struggle on the shore, Jenkins and Carter trying vainly to hold Thorne on the litter as it was torn from their grasp by the relentless current. Thorne's body slid sideways, hitting the water with a splash, vanishing beneath the surface. No! The scream tore from Eleanor's throat, raw and primal, lost in the roar of the river. The icy water closed over her head, darkness and cold consuming her as the current swept her downstream towards the spot where Captain Marcus Thorne, her betrayer or her protector, had disappeared beneath the black, icy water, the ledger's deadly secrets swallowed by the river, and all hope extinguished in the freezing embrace of the relentless current as the gunfire faded behind her and the snow continued to fall silently on the scene of carnage. The world vanished into a roaring, suffocating darkness colder than any Yorkshire winter Eleanor had ever known. The river's icy grasp was 1,000 knives stabbing through the borrowed woolens, stealing her breath, crushing her lungs. Panic, raw and absolute, seized her, flailing limbs tangling in the churning current that felt like a living thing trying to drag her down into its black heart. Water filled her nose and mouth, bitter and tasting of mud and decay. She surfaced for a gasping, choking instant, blinded by water and snow, the chaotic sounds of the ambush, the fading shouts, the sporadic gunfire, swallowed by the river's relentless roar. Then the current pulled her under again, tumbling her like a broken doll, banging her against submerged rocks hidden beneath the churning surface, pain blooming sharp and bright through the numbness. Thorne. The name was a silent scream in her mind, a desperate anchor point amidst the drowning chaos. He'd been unconscious, wounded, pulled under before her. Was he already dead? Lost? The image of his limp body sliding from the litter, swallowed by the dark water, fueled a surge of frantic energy born of pure terror and something deeper, fiercer. No. She kicked wildly, clawing towards the fractured gray light above, breaking the surface again, gasping air that felt like shards of glass in her chest. She was downstream now, the ambush site lost around a bend. Trees blurred past on the high banks. Ice floes, jagged and treacherous, swept alongside her, colliding with sickening thuds. She had to find him. She had to. Survival wasn't enough. Not without knowing. Not without him. The treacherous pull, the memory of his confession, his body shielding hers, the kiss in the storm, it all coalesced into a single, driving imperative cutting through the paralyzing cold. Spotting a thicker cluster of ice chunks caught against a half-submerged fallen tree jutting from the bank, she kicked and paddled with the last of her strength, the sodden woolens dragging her down like lead weights. Her frozen fingers scraped against slimy bark, found purchase. She hauled herself partially onto the log, coughing violently, icy water streaming from her hair and clothes, her body shaking uncontrollably. She clung there, gasping, scanning the churning gray water upstream. Nothing. Only the relentless flow, the bobbing ice, the skeletal trees lining the banks like silent witnesses. Despair, colder than the river, began to seep into her bones. Then, 20 yards upstream, near the opposite bank where the current swirled slower in an eddy behind a large boulder, she saw it. A dark shape, barely visible beneath the surface, snagged on something. An arm. A fold of fabric. Thorne. Without thought, only driven by that desperate, clawing need, she pushed off the log back into the freezing torrent, kicking hard against the current, angling towards the opposite bank. The cold was a physical agony now, sapping her strength, making her limbs feel like stone. The current fought her, trying to sweep her past. She kicked harder, gasping, her vision blurring, focusing solely on that dark shape. It was him. Thorne, face down, his coat snagged on a submerged branch near the boulder, the current pulling relentlessly at his body. His head was submerged. He wasn't moving. No. The sound was a raw croak torn from her frozen throat. She reached the eddy, the water marginally calmer but still chest-deep and numbing. She stumbled, went under, swallowed more icy water, fought back up. Reaching him, grabbing his heavy coat with fingers that felt like blocks of wood. Pulling, straining with every ounce of strength left in her battered body. The branch held fast. She screamed in frustration, a sound lost in the river's roar, pulling again, her feet slipping on the slick riverbed stones. She ducked under, the icy water shocking her senses, fumbling blindly beneath the surface where the branch snagged his coat. Her numb fingers found the rough wood, traced it to where it pierced the thick fabric. She pulled, twisted, yanked with a strength born of utter desperation. Something gave. The fabric ripped. Thorn's body surged free with the current's pull. Eleanor surfaced, gasping, grabbing him under the arms, hauling his head above water. He was a dead weight, terrifyingly limp, his face pale as marble, lips blue. She hooked one arm under his chin, kicking furiously towards the nearby bank, fighting the drag of his body and the current trying to reclaim them. Her muscles screamed, burning with lactic acid and cold. Her lungs felt like they were collapsing. Every kick was agony. The bank seemed impossibly far. Just one more. Her foot struck solid ground. She stumbled, fell to her knees in the shallows, still clutching Thorn, dragging him partly onto the muddy, snow-dusted shore before collapsing beside him, utterly spent, trembling violently, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. He wasn't breathing. His face was waxy, lifeless. The bandage on his arm was soaked through, the wound hidden beneath the sodden coat. The sight shattered her. After everything, to lose him like this. Fury advance, at Julian, at the river, at the sheer, brutal unfairness of it all surged through her, momentarily burning away the cold. She rolled him onto his back with strength she didn't know she possessed. Tilted his head back, pinched his nose, covered his cold, blue lips with her own, breathing her own meager breath into him, willing life back into his still body. Once, twice, she pressed the heel of her frozen hand onto his sternum, pushing down with frantic, uneven compressions, counting hoarsely through chattering teeth. Breathe, damn you. Breathe. Tears, hot against her icy skin, mingled with river water on her cheeks. She breathed for him again, pouring her own terror, her rage, her desperate, confusing need for him not to be gone into the lifeless shell before her. She pressed down on his chest, her arms trembling violently. Don't you dare leave me, Marcus Thorn. Not like this. Not after everything. On the fifth compression, his body convulsed. A gush of icy river water erupted from his mouth. He choked, a raw, racking sound, his body spasming as he rolled onto his side, coughing violently, retching up more water onto the muddy bank. Relief, so profound it felt like another kind of pain, washed over Eleanor. She collapsed back onto her heels, gasping, watching him cough, the terrible blue tinge slowly receding from his lips, replaced by a painful flush as life fought its way back. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, clouded with pain and disorientation, blinking against the gray light. They landed on her, drenched, shivering, mud-streaked, her hair plastered to her head, her face raw with cold and tears. Confusion warred with dawning awareness in his fever-bright gaze. Eleanor. His voice was a ruined whisper, barely audible over the river and the wind. What? He coughed again, wincing, his hand instinctively going to his wounded arm, hissing in pain. The vulnerability was absolute, terrifying. He was alive, but broken, feverish, utterly dependent. The hunters were still out there. Vance's men would be searching the riverbanks. They were exposed, freezing, weaponless. Eleanor pushed herself up, forcing her trembling limbs to obey. Survival wasn't over. It had just begun anew, infinitely more precarious. Don't talk, she ordered, her voice hoarse but surprisingly steady. She scanned the steep, wooded bank behind them. They needed shelter, fire, dry clothes, and they needed to move. Now. Can you stand? We need to get off this bank. They'll be looking. Thorn blinked, trying to process, the soldier's instinct slowly surfacing through the pain and drug haze. He nodded weakly, pushing himself up onto his good elbow, his face contorted with effort. Legs. Work, mostly. His attempt at a grimace looked more like a rictus of pain. Eleanor moved beside him, sliding her arm around his back under his good shoulder, ignoring the flare of protest from her own battered body. He was heavy, impossibly heavy. He tried to help, pushing with his legs, but his strength was gone. It took agonizing minutes, slipping and stumbling in the mud, but they finally managed to get him upright, leaning heavily on her, his breath rasping harshly in her ear. Every step was a torment for them both. They staggered up the slippery bank, crashing through frozen undergrowth, leaving an obvious trail in the thin snow. The woods were dense, ancient, offering some cover but also endless hiding places for their pursuers. The light was fading, the short winter day surrendering to an early, snow-laden dusk. They needed refuge. Desperately. Eleanor scanned the gloom, her eyes straining. Then she saw it, partially hidden by a thicket of holly and ivy, nestled against a rocky outcrop, the dark mouth of what looked like a shallow cave, or perhaps an old animal den. It wasn't much, but it was concealment. There, she gasped, steering Thorn towards it. Just a little further. They half fell, half crawled into the shallow depression. It was cramped, smelling of damp earth and animal musk, but blessedly out of the biting wind and driving snow. Thorn collapsed against the back wall, his eyes closing, his breathing shallow and rapid, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold, the fever raging. Eleanor sank down beside him, shivering violently, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. They were alive, but barely, weaponless, tracked. Thorn was burning up and weakening by the minute. And the ledger. Henderson was dead, swept away. The physical proof was gone, lost to the river. But the names, Sir Alistair Vance, the other powerful men, she closed her eyes, picturing the pages Thorn had briefly shown her in the firelight at the lodge, the dense script. A desperate, reckless idea sparked in her exhausted mind. She hadn't just glanced at it. In the tower, in the crypt, driven by fear and a need to understand the weapon that threatened her world, she had studied it. The columns, the dates, the damning names. She hadn't realized it then, but the sheer terror had seared them into her memory. Eleanor Street. Claire, the sheltered, bored lady of Blackwood Manor, was perhaps the only living soul who carried the ledger's deadly secrets etched into her mind. She looked at Thorn's feverish face, his vulnerability terrifying in the gathering gloom. Vance's men were coming. They had no weapons, no strength, no shelter worth the name. But they had the knowledge. And they had each other. For now, the dangerous game had entered its most desperate, deadly phase, huddled in a freezing hole in the ground, the hunter closing in, and the only weapon left was the treacherous, unforgettable memory of the ledger burning in Eleanor's mind as the winter darkness swallowed the woods whole. The shallow cave offered scant refuge, a mere pocket of frigid darkness against the howling wind and driving snow that scoured the woods beyond its meager mouth. Thorn slumped against the damp, earthen wall, his breathing a ragged, shallow rasp that echoed too loudly in the cramped space. The fever raged unchecked now, painting his face with an unnatural flush beneath the grime and pallor, sweat beading on his brow despite the bone-deep cold leaching into the den. His eyes, when they flickered open, were glassy, unfocused, burning with an inner fire that consumed his dwindling strength. He shivered violently one moment, then burned like a furnace the next, his wounded arm held stiffly against his body, the crude bandage Eleanor had managed to tie with numb fingers already soaked through with a mixture of river water and fresh blood. Eleanor crouched beside him, her own body racked with tremors she could no longer suppress, the borrowed woolens heavy and icy against her skin. Despair threatened to engulf her, colder and deeper than the river. They were trapped, weaponless. Thorn was dying by inches. And Vance's hunters, cold, professional killers unlike Silas's thugs, were out there, methodically sweeping the riverbanks, following the trail of broken branches and disturbed snow their desperate scramble up the bank had left. Every snapped twig outside the cave, every rustle in the undergrowth, sent her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. She strained her ears, listening past the wind's moan and Thorn's labored breathing. Silence, now. But silence could be more terrifying than noise. It meant they were close. Listening. Hunting. Thorn stirred, a low moan escaping his cracked lips. His good hand fumbled weakly at his side, searching for something absent. His pistol. Lost to the river. His eyes opened, bleary, struggling to focus on her face inches away in the gloom. Eleanor. His voice was a ruined whisper, barely audible. The ledger. It's gone, she whispered back, her own voice hoarse. The river took it. Took Henderson. The image of the magistrate jerking forward, the dark stain spreading, vanishing beneath the black water, flashed before her eyes, a fresh wave of icy dread washing over her. His brow furrowed, confusion warring with the fever. Gone. But Vance needs silenced. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made her flinch. Names, dangerous. The names, Eleanor said, leaning closer, her voice gaining a sudden, fierce intensity. The spark she'd felt in the cave, the terrifying realization, flared into desperate purpose. "Thorn, listen to me. The ledger is gone, but I remember it." His glassy eyes sharpened, just for a fraction of a second. Focus pierced the fever haze. "Remember. Every page," she breathed, the words tumbling out in a low, urgent rush. "Every column. Every date. Every name. Sir Alistair Vance, Lord Peregrine Finch, Sir Geoffrey Kane. The payments for the Dover Garrison information, the silencing of the customs officer in Bristol, the shipments routed through Antwerp. I studied it, Thorn. In the tower, in the crypt. I was terrified, but I looked. I saw. It's all here." She tapped her temple, her gaze locked onto his. Understanding dawned in his fever-bright eyes, followed by a flicker of profound alarm, quickly replaced by a grim, calculating light. The soldier, buried beneath pain and delirium, surfaced briefly. "Alive, in your head," he rasped. "More dangerous than paper now." He tried to push himself up, gasping as pain lanced through his arm. "They know. Henderson dead, ledger gone, think it over." He sagged back, breathing hard. "But, you carry the proof. They'll want you silenced, permanently." The chilling confirmation of her worst fear solidified the ice in her veins. She wasn't just Eleanor Street. Claire, inconvenient witness. She was the ledger now. A walking, breathing repository of secrets powerful enough to destroy empires. Vance wouldn't stop, ever, unless she was erased. "We have to move," she stated, the decision crystallizing with terrifying clarity. Staying meant dying in this hole. "Can you stand, even for a little while?" She scanned the cave entrance, the snow falling thicker now, already beginning to obscure their tracks. It was their only advantage. Thorn gritted his teeth, the tendons in his neck standing out like cords. "Help me up." It was less a request than an order dredged from the depths of his will. It was a brutal, agonizing process. Eleanor wedged her shoulder under his good arm, bracing her feet against the uneven ground. He pushed with his legs, his face contorted in silent agony, a low groan escaping as his weight settled onto her. He was impossibly heavy, his body radiating scorching heat even through their soaked clothes. They stumbled towards the cave entrance, a grotesque, shuffling dance of survival. Peering out, the woods were a monochrome nightmare of white and gray, the snow swirling in thick veils, reducing visibility to mere yards. The wind howled, masking sound. Perfect cover, if they could move. "Which way?" Eleanor gasped, struggling under his weight, scanning the blinding whiteness. The river was behind them, death downstream. The road was suicide. Deeper into the woods. Towards Thornfield. Impossible to know. Thorn lifted his head, squinting against the snow, his senses, honed by years in the field, pushing past the fever. He sniffed the air, tilted his head. "Smoke," he rasped, so faintly she almost missed it. "Faint. Wood smoke, downstream, left bank." He gestured weakly with his chin. "Hunters, camp, or shelter." It was a threadbare hope. Hunters meant Vance's men. Shelter meant potential salvation, or another trap. But it was the only lead. "Downstream. Left bank," Eleanor repeated, steeling herself. "Hold on, Marcus. Just hold on." They plunged into the blizzard. The snow was already knee-deep in places, sucking at their boots, dragging them down. The wind whipped stinging ice crystals into their faces, blinding them. Eleanor fought for every step, bearing Thorn's faltering weight, her muscles screaming in protest, her lungs burning with the effort and the cold. He tried to help, shuffling his feet, but his strength was ebbing fast, his breathing becoming more labored, his steps increasingly uncoordinated. He leaned heavier on her, his head lolling against her shoulder at times, his muttered words lost in the wind, fragments of fever dreams, battlefield commands, once, her name, whispered like a plea. Time lost meaning. It was a world reduced to the next step, the next gasping breath, the relentless assault of the storm. Eleanor, focused only on moving forward, following the faint, imagined scent of woodsmoke Thorn had detected, praying it wasn't a fever-induced phantom. The woods closed around them, ancient trees groaning under the weight of the snow, branches cracking like gunshots in the wind. She stumbled constantly, falling to her knees more than once, dragging Thorn down with her, struggling back up through sheer, terrified will. He was a dead weight now, barely conscious, his skin burning against hers even through the layers of wet wool. Just as despair threatened to swallow her whole, as her legs threatened to buckle for the last time, she saw it. A flicker of orange light, deep within the trees ahead, barely visible through the swirling snow. Not the bright, dancing light of a campfire, but the steady, dim glow of a window. A structure, shelter, hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She summoned the last dregs of her strength, half dragging, half carrying Thorn towards the light. It resolved into a small, stone-built cottage, nestled against a hillside, smoke curling weakly from a chimney, fighting against the gale. No sign of movement, no lanterns outside. It looked deserted, or perhaps the occupant was huddled deep within against the storm. They staggered the final yards, collapsing against the heavy wooden door. Eleanor raised a frozen, trembling fist and hammered against it, the sound swallowed by the wind's roar. "Please," she cried, her voice raw and broken. "Help us. Please, open the door." She sagged against the rough wood, Thorn a heavy, silent burden against her side, his eyes closed, his breathing frighteningly shallow. The glow from the window was the only warmth in a frozen hell, their last gamble played out on a doorstep in a blizzard, the memory of the ledger burning in her mind like a brand, and the hunters, shadows drawing ever closer through the white, howling dark. The heavy oak door groaned inwards, revealing not the hostile glare of Vance's hunters but the wary, weathered face of an elderly woman, her eyes sharp and intelligent beneath a linen cap, framed by strands of iron gray hair escaping its confines. She held a stout iron poker loosely, not aggressively, but ready, her gaze sweeping over the two bedraggled, ice-encrusted figures half collapsed on her threshold. Eleanor, her face raw with cold and exhaustion, eyes wide with desperate pleading, and Thorn, a terrifying dead weight slumped against her, his face deathly pale beneath the fever flush, eyes closed, breath rasping like torn parchment. The warmth from within the cottage rushed out, a tantalizing, life-giving promise against the howling blizzard at their backs. "Mercy upon us," the woman breathed, her voice surprisingly strong, laced with a thick Yorkshire brogue. Her sharp eyes took in Thorn's blood-soaked sleeve, the unnatural angle of his pallor, Eleanor's desperate grip. The poker lowered slightly. "Bring him in, lass. Quick now, afore ye both freeze solid on my step." Relief, so potent it made Eleanor's knees buckle, warred with the immediate, terrifying urgency of Thorn's condition. She hauled him forward with a final, agonizing surge of strength, stumbling across the threshold into the blessed, smoky warmth of the small cottage. The door slammed shut behind them, muffling the storm's fury, enclosing them in a space that smelled overwhelmingly of wood smoke, drying herbs, baking bread, and lye soap. The woman, Martha, as she tersely introduced herself while directing Eleanor towards a low cot near the roaring stone fireplace, moved with brisk, no-nonsense efficiency that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and practical solutions. "Lay him down, careful like. That arm's a mess." Eleanor obeyed, easing Thorn onto the rough wool blankets, his body limp, barely responsive. Martha was already bustling, throwing more logs onto the fire, filling a large copper kettle from a bucket by the hearth, rummaging in a sturdy oak chest for clean linen. "Strip off those wet rags, lass, both of ye," she commanded, not looking up as she tore the linen into strips. "Can't fight fever wrapped in ice. Blankets in the chest. Dry yourself first, then see to him." The blunt instruction cut through Eleanor's daze. "Strip. Here. Now." With Thorn unconscious, vulnerable, and this stranger watching. Victorian propriety screamed a protest, but the violent shivers racking Thorn's frame, the alarming heat radiating from his skin even through the soaked clothes, silenced it. Survival. She peeled off the frozen, heavy woolens with numb fingers, her modesty a distant luxury. Martha handed her a thick, coarse blanket, which Eleanor wrapped around herself like a cocoon, the rough fibers a shocking contrast to the silks of blackwood but blissfully dry. The warmth began to seep into her bones, a painful, tingling thaw. Then she turned to Thorn. His coat was a sodden, bloody ruin. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers clumsy with cold and residual shock. Martha joined her, her movements swift and purposeful, showing no squeamishness as they peeled the layers away from the wounded arm. The crude bandage Eleanor had tied was soaked dark red and brown, stuck to the inflamed flesh beneath. Martha hissed through her teeth. "Gunshot. Festering already. River filth in it, no doubt." She poured steaming water from the kettle into a basin, adding a handful of pungent dried herbs from a jar, rosemary, thyme, something sharp and medicinal Eleanor didn't recognize. Hold his shoulder, lass. Firm. This'll pain him. Eleanor braced herself, gripping Thorne's uninjured shoulder as Martha, with surprising strength, began carefully loosening the sodden bandage. Thorne groaned, a deep, guttural sound of agony, his body arching off the cot despite his unconsciousness, his eyes flying open for a second, wild and unseeing, before fluttering shut again. "Easy, soldier," Martha murmured, not unkindly, but her hands didn't stop. "Gotta get the poison out." The bandage came away, revealing the wound in the firelight. It was worse than Eleanor remembered, an angry, swollen gash, the edges ragged and purplish red, pus mingling with blood and river muck. The smell was faintly putrid. Martha cleaned it ruthlessly with the hot herb-infused water, her touch firm but not cruel. Thorne writhed, teeth clenched, low moans escaping him. Eleanor held on, whispering useless reassurances, her stomach churning, her own pain forgotten in the face of his suffering. Martha packed the wound with a pungent green paste from another jar, then bound it tightly with fresh linen. "That poultice'll draw the badness," she stated, wiping her hands. "But the fever's deep. Needs willow bark tea, plenty of it, and cold cloths on his head. And rest, though I doubt the devil himself could make him lie easy." She turned her sharp gaze fully on Eleanor. "Now, lass, talk. Who's chasing ye? Soldiers? Bailiffs? Or worse?" Eleanor met Martha's eyes, seeing not suspicion, but a hard, practical assessment. This woman lived isolated in the woods, she knew danger. Trust was a gamble, but silence was impossible now. "Worse," Eleanor whispered, the word heavy in the warm, herb-scented air. "Men who kill. Powerful men. Because he knows things. Things that could destroy them." She gestured weakly towards Thorne. "They ambushed our carriage by the river. Killed the magistrate who was helping us." Martha's lips thinned. She glanced at Thorne's pale face, then back at Eleanor. "Magistrate Henderson. I knew him. Stern, but fair." She didn't ask for details about the things. Her gaze swept Eleanor's exhausted, haunted face. "Knobs, the pair of ye, clear as day, even covered in muck. Trouble follows kind like flies to honey, especially trouble with teeth." She moved to the window, peering out through a gap in the heavy shutters at the swirling white darkness. "Blizzard's settin' in proper. Nothin' movin' out there tonight, not man nor beast. Gives us time." She turned back, her expression resolute. "He stays here. You stay. Martha Bell hasn't turned away a soul in need these 60 years, and I'll not start with a dyin' man and a lass who looks like a drowned ghost. But mark me, when the storm breaks, if he lives, ye move on. Fast. I've no wish for killers at my door." The reprieve was temporary, conditional, but it was sanctuary. Eleanor nodded mutely, tears of sheer, overwhelming relief finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Martha grunted, seemingly embarrassed by the display. "None o' that. Stoke the fire. I'll brew the willow bark. And get some o' that broth into ye. Ye look fit to drop." As Martha busied herself at the hearth, Eleanor sank onto a stool beside Thorne's cot. The warmth, the relative safety, the simple act of sitting still, unleashed a tidal wave of exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. She watched Thorne's restless, fevered movements, the way his brow furrowed even in unconsciousness, the rapid, shallow rise and fall of his bandaged chest. Martha was right, the storm provided a shield, but it was fleeting. Vance's men wouldn't stop. They would regroup, track the river, search every hovel. And Thorne, he was far from safe. The fever burned fiercely, the wound still threatened, and the memory of the ledger, the damning names Eleanor carried locked in her mind, was now the most dangerous thing in this humble cottage. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently brushed a sweat-damp lock of hair from his forehead. His skin was still scorching. The gesture was intimate, protective, born of shared terror and a desperate, burgeoning need she couldn't name. Martha watched from the hearth, her expression unreadable, the steam from the willow bark kettle rising like a spectral veil in the firelight, the crackle of the logs the only sound besides Thorne's ragged breathing and the relentless howl of the blizzard sealing them in their fragile, temporary haven. The hunter momentarily thwarted by nature's fury, but the deadly game merely paused, the next move hanging on the thread of a wounded soldier's life and the secrets held in a sheltered lady's memory. The relentless drumming of the storm against the cottage's thick stone walls became the rhythm of their fragile sanctuary, a constant reminder of the world of white fury outside that both protected and imprisoned them. Thorn burned through the night and the following day, a furnace trapped within a failing body, his ravings shifting from battlefield Spanish to fragmented warnings about Vance, Finch, and shadowy figures with knives, his lucid moments brief and filled with pain-filled disorientation where he'd clutch weakly at Eleanor's hand, his eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity before succumbing again to the fever's grip. Eleanor kept vigil, a silent wraith wrapped in Martha's scratchy blankets, alternating cold compresses on his brow with spoon-feeding him sips of the bitter willow bark tea Martha brewed relentlessly, the pungent steam mingling with the wood smoke and the unsettling scent of the drawing poultice on his arm. Martha moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned campaigner, replenishing the fire, preparing simple, fortifying broths, her sharp eyes constantly darting to the shuttered windows, her ears attuned to sounds beyond the wind. The creak of a branch laden with snow, the distant crack of ice, any sign the blizzard's shield was failing or that hunters had braved its wrath. She asked no more questions, her silence a tacit acceptance of their peril and her own precarious role in it, though her gaze often lingered on Eleanor, taking in the aristocratic lines etched with exhaustion and fear, the stubborn set of her jaw as she tended the soldier. The tension was a living thing in the small room, thick as the smoke, punctuated only by Thorn's ragged breaths and Martha's occasional muttered observations about the storm's temper. Eleanor's mind was a churning sea, the damning names etched behind her eyes: Vance, Finch, Kane, the Dover betrayal, the Bristol murder, the Antwerp shipments, a constant, terrifying litany, the visceral memory of Thorn's body limp and cold in the river, the frantic struggle to drag him ashore, the desperate breaths she forced into his lungs, the searing heat of their kiss in the storm-lashed hut, a stolen moment of terrifying intimacy that felt like a lifetime ago, and Martha's blunt warning echoing, "When the storm breaks, ye move on fast." She watched Thorn's restless face, the play of firelight on his stubbled jaw, the vulnerability so starkly at odds with the fierce soldier he embodied, and a fierce, protective instinct warred violently with the ingrained suspicion Julian's note had planted and the chilling implications of his connection to Vance. Could she trust the man who had fought Silas's thugs, taken a bullet for her, confessed his actions were driven by protecting her, even as he moved in Vance's lethal shadow? The ledger in her mind held no answers, only peril. The fever broke on the second night, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a sudden, profound stillness. Thorn's thrashing ceased. The terrifying heat radiating from him began to ebb, replaced by a clammy sweat that soaked the rough linen sheets. His breathing, while still shallow, lost its frantic edge, settling into a slower, deeper rhythm. Eleanor, dozing fitfully on the stool beside him, jerked awake at the change. She pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. Still warm, but no longer scorching. His eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been in days, though clouded with exhaustion and pain. They focused slowly, finding her face hovering above him in the firelight. A flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. Eleanor. His voice was a dry rasp, barely audible, but coherent. Relief, so profound it stole her breath, washed over her, followed instantly by a fresh wave of apprehension. The reprieve was over. The reckoning began. "You're alive," she whispered, the words thick with emotion she couldn't suppress. Relief, fear, the sheer overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. He tried a weak nod, grimacing as the movement jarred his arm. "Thanks, to you." His gaze drifted past her, taking in the low, smoke-blackened beams, the stone hearth, Martha sitting silently mending by the fire. "Where?" "Martha's cottage," Eleanor said quickly. "We were ambushed at the river. Henderson. Henderson is dead. The ledger is gone. Swept away." She saw the understanding dawn in his eyes, the soldier assessing the tactical loss. "But, I remember it, Marcus. All of it. Every name. Every transaction. It's all here." She tapped her temple again. Thorn closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing this. When he opened them, the clarity was sharper, the blue gaze fixed on hers with unnerving intensity. "More dangerous than ever," he breathed. "Vance, he'll know Henderson failed. Ledger lost, but if he suspects you saw." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, total annihilation. Martha spoke from her corner, her voice low but carrying easily in the small space. "Storms slacken. Winds shifted. Snow'll stop by dawn, mark my words. Ground'll be soft, treacherous but passable. And quiet. Too quiet for tracks. She set down her mending, her eyes meeting Thorn's with grim pragmatism. Ye breathe easier, soldier, but you're still carved meat. Can't run. Can barely walk, I'd wager. And she nodded towards Eleanor, carries a burden heavier than any pack. They'll come, soon as they can move. Thorn pushed himself up slightly on his good elbow, ignoring the fresh stab of pain, his jaw tightening. We need to get to Thornfield. Denham's guard, only chance. 30 miles. Martha scoffed softly. In her state, through melting snow with hunters on her tail. Suicide. Got a better plan? Thorn challenged, his voice gaining a fraction of its old steel. Martha was silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting between them, the wounded, desperate soldier and the noblewoman turned keeper of apocalyptic secrets. Finally, she sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Maybe I do. But it ain't pretty, and it ain't safe. There's an old drover's track. Runs high along the fellside, northwest. Misses the main roads. Comes out near Denham's back pastures. Shorter, harder, steeper, but hidden. Few know it now. She fixed Thorn with a piercing look. Can ye ride? Barely, I reckon. But I've an old mule. Stubborn as sin, but steady. Strong enough to carry ye if ye don't mind a slow, bone-jarring crawl. Hope, thin and fragile, flickered in Eleanor's chest. A path, a way forward. Thorn met Martha's gaze, a spark of the old determination igniting. Better than walkin'. Aye, Martha conceded. But listen sharp. The track's treacherous after snowmelt. Landslides. Washed out sections. And if they've scouts watchin' the fells. She didn't need to elaborate. Ye leave at first light. I'll pack what victuals I can spare. Warm clothes. The mule's name is Bert. Treat him firm. She stood, moving towards a small cupboard. Now, soldier, let's see that arm. Time to change that poultice. And lass, she turned to Eleanor, her expression softening almost imperceptibly, get some rest while ye can. Dawn comes swift, and the road ahead is longer than miles. As Martha began the painful process of tending his wound, Thorn's gaze found Eleanor's again. The shared understanding was profound, wordless. The storm's protection was ending. The ledger's secrets, locked in her mind, made her the ultimate target. Vance's hunters would be moving. Their journey to Thornfield, precarious at best, was a desperate gamble for survival, a race against ruthless enemies and Thorn's own fragile strength, the dangerous truth between them a silent, binding force as they prepared to step back into the lethal game under a clearing, watchful sky. The echoing silence that followed Vance's arrest in the Thornfield Hall gunroom was thicker than the lingering gunsmoke, heavy with the aftershock of violence and the sudden, precarious shift in fortune. Eleanor stood frozen, her borrowed shawl clutched tight, the damning names still echoing in her mind like phantom artillery. Vance, Finch, Kane, their power momentarily contained but far from broken. Denham's guards moved with disciplined efficiency, disarming the stunned attackers who'd accompanied Vance, their faces masks of disbelief at their employer's sudden, ignominious fall. Vance himself, held firmly between two burly guards, his fine coat rumpled, his face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief, spat venomous threats that bounced harmlessly off the stone walls. You think this is over, Thorn? You think you've won? You're a dead man walking. Finch will have your head. Kane will bury you. And her. His wild, hate-filled eyes locked onto Eleanor. She's a walking ghost. She won't live to see the sunset. Denham, his face grim as granite, silenced him with a curt gesture. Take him below. The strong cellar. Double guard. See to his men as well. As Vance was hauled, struggling and cursing, from the room, the immediate tension bled away, leaving a hollow exhaustion in the thundering echo of Eleanor's own heartbeat in her ears. She swayed, the adrenaline surge crashing down, replaced by bone-deep weariness and the overwhelming reality of Thorn's presence beside her, solid, alive, his pistol now lowered but his body still coiled with residual tension, his gaze fixed on the doorway where Vance had vanished, a storm of unreadable emotion brewing in his intense blue eyes. Denham turned to them, his stern expression softening marginally as he took in Eleanor's pallor and the fresh blood staining the bandage visible beneath Thorn's hastily buttoned shirt. Lady Eleanor, Captain Thorn, you're both safe now, for the moment. Vance is contained, and my men are securing the perimeter. But he's right about one thing, he added grimly, his gaze shifting meaningfully to Eleanor. The danger isn't past while you carry that knowledge. Vance's associates won't rest. Thorne finally tore his gaze from the door, turning towards Denham, his voice rough but steady. We need to act fast, Sir Edgar. Eleanor's memory is the only evidence now. We need a magistrate, someone beyond Vance's reach, someone impeccable. And we need to get her testimony recorded, sealed, and sent to London, to the highest authority, before Fincher Kane realize Vance has failed and move to silence her permanently. Denham nodded sharply. Agreed. I know the man, Sir William Renshaw. Sits on the King's Bench. Honest as the day is long, and powerful enough to stand against this filth. He has an estate 20 miles east. We can reach him by noon tomorrow with a fast carriage and escort. He glanced at Thorne's arm. But you, Captain, Thorne waved it off, though Eleanor saw the tightness around his eyes betraying the pain. It's holding. All right. His gaze then found Eleanor's, searching her face, the intensity now layered with a profound weariness and something else. A question, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Eleanor, are you? The question hung unfinished, but she understood. Are you all right? Can you do this? Do you trust me now? Asterisk. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion sounded in the hallway. A young guard appeared, slightly breathless. Sir Edgar. We've apprehended someone trying to sneak through the back kitchen gardens. Claims he knows Lady Eleanor. Says his name is Saint Clair Julian. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow, a surge of conflicting emotions, relief warring with fury, betrayal with a desperate, sisterly fear. Thorne's expression hardened instantly, his hand instinctively moving towards his pistol grip. Denham's brows drew together. Bring him, but keep him guarded. Moments later, Julian Street. Claire was half pushed into the gunroom. He looked a far cry from the charming rake Eleanor remembered. Gaunt, pale, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, his clothes travel-stained and threadbare, he flinched under the combined scrutiny. His gaze darted wildly, to Denham's stern face, to Thorne's cold, dangerous glare, and finally, settling on Eleanor with a mixture of shame and desperate pleading. Ellie. Thank God. I heard about the ambush, about Vance. I had to come, I had to warn you. Warn me. Eleanor's voice cut through his stammering, cold and sharper than she intended, fueled by months of fear and the image of Silas's thugs storming Blackwood. Warn me after you stole a viper's nest and threw me to the snakes. Julian. After you vanished and left us all to face the consequences. She took a step towards him, the borrowed shawl slipping from her shoulders, her eyes blazing. Your warning. That pathetic note telling me not to trust the one man who actually stood between me and Silas's knives. Who took a bullet for me. Who nearly died dragging me out of that river because of your damned ledger. Julian shrank back, genuine fear in his eyes now, not just of the armed men, but of his sister's fury. I panicked, Ellie. I was terrified. Vance, Thorne, I didn't know who to trust. Thorne worked for Vance. I thought he was part of it, coming to finish the job. His gaze flickered to Thorne, filled with terror. He did work for him. He told you, didn't he? Thorne moved then, a single, swift step that brought him directly in front of Julian, his presence suddenly dominating the room, radiating a controlled fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. I served under Vance, Thorne corrected, his voice dangerously low, each word precise and cold as ice. I followed orders I believed served a purpose, however murky. But I never stole for him. I never used innocence as shields. And I sure as hell didn't abandon my own sister to be butchered by cutthroats while I ran and hid. He leaned in slightly, his blue eyes pinning Julian like a specimen. You stole that ledger thinking it was leverage, you fool. You thought you could play with vipers. You nearly got Eleanor killed. Repeatedly. Julian trembled, unable to hold Thorne's gaze, his bravado utterly shattered. I just wanted out. The debts, Silas. Silas is likely dead or running by now, Denham interjected coldly. Vance won't tolerate loose ends who fail. Your usefulness, Mr. Street, Claire, is at an end. He turned to his guards. Take him to join Vance's men in the cellar. He can share his excuses with the rats. As guards seized Julian's arms, he cried out, struggling weakly. Ellie. Please. You can't let them. Eleanor met his desperate gaze, her own expression unyielding. The sisterly bond was strained to breaking, frayed by betrayal and terror. You brought this on yourself, Julian, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its earlier heat, filled only with a weary sorrow. You need to face what you've done. She turned away, unable to watch as he was hauled, sobbing protests, from the room. The brief surge of anger faded, leaving a hollow ache and a profound exhaustion. Denham cleared his throat. I'll arrange quarters for you both. Lady Eleanor, a maid will attend you. Captain, my surgeon will see to that arm again. We leave for Renshaw's at first light. He gave them a curt nod and strode out, leaving them alone in the cavernous gunroom, the only sound the crackling of the dying fire in the hearth and the distant echo of the heavy cellar door clanging shut. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words, shared trauma, and the terrifying intimacy forged in blood, river water, and blizzards. Thorne finally turned fully towards her, the harsh lines around his eyes softening as he took in her slumped shoulders, the shadows under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. Eleanor, he began, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. The dam within her broke then. Not with tears, but with a flood of words, a torrent of fear, relief, and the desperate need for understanding. He worked for him, Marcus. Vance. You did. Julian wasn't entirely wrong to be afraid. That ledger, the names, your name wasn't on it, but your hand, your actions, were they part of it? The things Vance did, the Dover garrison, the man in Bristol. She searched his face, her gray eyes wide, pleading for truth, the final barrier of trust trembling. Thorne didn't look away. He met her gaze squarely, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed earlier now fully present, raw and unguarded. I served Vance, he admitted, the words heavy. I followed orders in a shadow war where right and wrong blurred into gray. Did I procure information? Yes. Did I neutralize threats? Threats as defined by men like Vance, yes. Did I know the full scope of his corruption? The murders, the betrayals for pure profit. He shook his head slowly, a muscle working in his jaw. No, not then, not fully. When I saw the pattern, when I realized the rot went deeper, I walked away. Sold my commission. Tried to leave it behind. He took a step closer, the space between them charged with the weight of his confession and the shared horrors they'd endured. Finding out Julian had that ledger, knowing what Vance would do to retrieve it, who he would hurt, his gaze held hers, intense, unwavering. Coming to Blackwood wasn't about Vance. It wasn't about clearing my conscience, though God knows I need to. It was about stopping him. It was about you. From the moment I saw your portrait in Julian's drunken ramblings months ago, before he vanished, he swallowed, the admission costing him. And then seeing you in that drawing room, terrified but defiant, it became about you. He reached out slowly, his calloused hand, the hand that had held a pistol against Vance moments ago, gently cupping her cold cheek. His touch was electric, sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with the drafty room. I know I'm not a good man, Eleanor. My past is stained, but everything I've done since setting foot in Yorkshire has been to keep you safe. To see you live, to see you, free of this nightmare. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Do you believe me? The last vestige of doubt, the ghost of Julian's warning, dissolved like mist under sunlight. She saw the truth in his eyes, the regret, the weariness, the fierce, protective devotion that had driven him through gunfire and freezing rivers. She saw the man who had shielded her, fought for her, confessed his darkest truths. The man who kissed her with desperate longing in the heart of a storm. Yes, she breathed, the single word releasing the tension that had bound her for days. I believe you, Marcus. She leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hand a lifeline. I believe you. The space between them vanished. His hand slid from her cheek to cradle the back of her head, his other arm, wounded but strong, encircling her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss wasn't like the desperate collision in the storm-lashed hut. This was different, slower, deeper, a claiming born not of terror, but of shared survival, hard-won trust, and a fierce, undeniable passion that had simmered beneath every glance, every touch, every shared danger. It was a promise sealed in the quiet aftermath of violence, under the watchful gaze of ancient weapons on the walls, the taste of gunpowder and river water and something uniquely the mingling as the fire crackled its final embers, the immediate danger contained but the path forward uncertain, yet faced together, finally, irrevocably bound by the fire forged in the crucible of the deadly ledger's shadow. The heavy oak door of the chamber at Thornfield Hall clicked shut behind them, the solid, resonant sound sealing them into a world reduced to the soft glow of a single oil lamp and the lingering warmth of the fire a maid had lit against the encroaching night chill. The silence after the day's relentless tension and the grueling recitation for Renshaw felt deafening, a physical weight pressing in on them both. Eleanor stood just inside the room, her shoulders slumped with an exhaustion that went deeper than bone, the borrowed gown feeling alien against her skin, which still hummed with the phantom sensations of the journey, the jolting carriage, the icy river, the desperate press of Marcus's body against hers in the blizzard. Marcus leaned back against the door, his eyes closed for a long moment, his face pale and etched with pain and fatigue in the lamplight, the bandage on his arm a stark white reminder of how close they had both come to oblivion, his broad chest rising and falling with a deep, steadying breath that seemed to draw the silence into him before he finally opened his eyes, their blue intensity finding her in the dimness, and in that shared look, the careful composure they had maintained for Denham, for Renshaw, for the guards, shattered completely, the unspoken current that had crackled between them through gunfire and icy water and damning testimony igniting into an undeniable conflagration. He pushed away from the door in a single, fluid motion that belied his injury and closed the distance between them, his good hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch, his gaze searching hers, not for permission, but for the shared truth that had been forged in the crucible of the past days. And finding it blazing back at him, he lowered his head and his mouth found hers in a kiss that was nothing like the desperate clash in the storm hut or the solemn seal in the gunroom. This was a claiming, deep and slow and devastatingly thorough, a kiss that spoke of survival, of gratitude, of a hunger that had been simmering beneath every guarded glance and protective touch, a kiss that tasted of the bitter willow bark tea and the faint, metallic hint of blood and something uniquely, irrevocably them. Eleanor melted into him, her hands coming up to clutch at the rough fabric of his coat, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, her body arching into the solid, reassuring strength of him, the world outside, the threats, the names, the lingering shadows of Vance and Finch and Kane. Receding into nothingness, there was only the heat of his mouth, the scent of leather and clean sweat in him, the feel of his heart hammering against hers, a frantic, living counterpoint to the death they had cheated. His kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, a bold, possessive invasion that she welcomed with a soft moan, her own tongue meeting his in a desperate, hungry dance, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at his nape, pulling him closer, needing to erase every inch of space, every memory of fear and cold and isolation. He broke the kiss only to trail his lips along her jaw, down the sensitive column of her throat, his breath hot against her skin, murmuring her name like a prayer, a benediction, his hands moving from her face to her shoulders, sliding the heavy wool cloak from her, letting it pool on the floor at their feet, his touch burning through the thin fabric of the borrowed gown, setting her nerves alight. Eleanor, he rasped against her skin, his voice thick with desire and a raw emotion that made her heart clench, his good arm wrapping around her waist, hauling her flush against him, letting her feel the hard evidence of his need pressed against her belly, a shock of heat and promise that made her knees weaken. "I need you," he breathed, the words a raw confession torn from the depths of him, stripped of all soldierly pretense, all guarded control. "God, I need to feel you, to know you're real, to know we're both still here." She answered him not with words but with action, her own hands fumbling with the buttons of his coat, pushing it from his shoulders, heedless of his wound, needing to feel his skin, to map the hard plains of his chest, to trace the scars that told the story of the man he was, the man who had fought his way through hell to reach her. He helped her, shrugging out of the coat, wincing only slightly, his eyes never leaving her face, dark with a possessive intensity that should have frightened her but instead sent a fresh wave of liquid heat cooling low in her belly. His shirt followed, joining the growing pile on the floor, revealing the powerful expanse of his torso, pale skin stretched over taut muscle, the stark white bandage a jarring contrast, a testament to the price he had paid. Her breath hitched as her fingers traced the line of his collarbone, the hard swell of his pectoral, the flat plane of his stomach, feeling the muscles jump and quiver under her touch, learning the geography of his strength, his vulnerability. He stood still under her exploration, his breathing ragged, his eyes burning into her, letting her take what she needed, his own hands restless on her back, tracing the line of her spine through the gown. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his voice a husky rasp that vibrated through her, his hand coming up to cup her breast through the fabric, his thumb finding her nipple and circling it until it pebbled into a hard, aching point, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. The sensation was electric, jolting through her, a direct line of fire to her core, and she pressed herself into his hand, a wordless plea for more. He obliged, his mouth finding hers again in a searing kiss as his hands worked the fastenings of her gown with a surprising dexterity, pushing the fabric from her shoulders, letting it slide down her body to join his clothes on the floor, until she stood before him in only her thin chemise, her skin pebbling in the cool air, her body trembling not from cold but from a need so profound it was terrifying. He swept her up into his arms then, ignoring the protest of his wounded muscle, and carried her the few steps to the large, canopied bed, laying her down on the soft coverlet as if she were made of the most precious glass, following her down, his body covering hers, his weight a delicious, anchoring pressure. The lamplight cast golden shadows over his face as he looked down at her, his expression a mixture of awe, desire, and something so tender it made her throat tighten. "I have dreamed of this," he confessed, his voice low and rough with emotion, his fingers tracing the line of her brow, her cheek, her lips. "Since the moment I saw you in that damned drawing room, looking at me with those storm-gray eyes, so brave and so terrified. I have dreamed of having you just like this." He lowered his head, capturing her mouth in another deep, soul-searching kiss as his hand slid down her body, over the curve of her hip, down her thigh, pushing the hem of her chemise up until his fingers found the hot, damp core of her. She cried out against his mouth, her hips arching off the bed as his fingers stroked her, explored her, learning the secrets of her pleasure with a soldier's focus and a lover's reverence, finding the sensitive nub hidden in her folds and circling it with a tortuous, exquisite precision that made her writhe beneath him, her fingers digging into the hard muscles of his back, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "Marcus, please," she begged, the words a broken whisper, her world narrowing to the point where his touch met her flesh, to the burning blue of his eyes watching her unravel. "I need you, now." He didn't make her wait. He shifted above her, his own arousal, hard and thick and eager, pressing against her thigh. He guided himself to her entrance, his gaze locked with hers, and with one slow, deliberate, earth-shattering thrust, he filled her completely, stretching her, completing her, a low groan tearing from his throat as he buried himself to the hilt. There was a moment of sharp, fleeting pain, quickly subsumed by an overwhelming sensation of rightness, of belonging, as if a missing piece of her soul had finally clicked into place. He stilled, letting her adjust, his forehead pressed to hers, his breathing harsh. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a vow. Then he began to move, a slow, deep, rhythmic cadence that stole her breath and her reason. Each thrust was a promise, a claiming, a testament to survival. She met him stroke for stroke, her hips rising to meet his, her legs wrapping around his waist, pulling him deeper, losing herself in the feel of him, in the scent of their joining, in the raw, primal sounds of their passion. The outside world ceased to exist. There was no ledger, no Vance, no past, no future. There was only this, the slick friction of their bodies, the pounding of their hearts, the whispered endearments and guttural pleas, the building, coiling tension that tightened in her belly with each powerful thrust. She felt herself spiraling towards a precipice, a pleasure so intense it bordered on pain, her fingers clutching at his shoulders, her cries becoming more frantic. He felt it too, his rhythm becoming more urgent, his own control fraying. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice raw. "Look at me when you come." Her eyes, hazy with pleasure, found his, and the intensity there, the absolute, unwavering focus on her pleasure, shattered her completely. A wave of ecstasy, blinding and absolute, crashed over her, tearing a scream from her throat as her body convulsed around his, milking him, pulling him over the edge with her. He followed with a hoarse cry, his own release wrenching from the depths of him, his body shuddering as he poured himself into her, his name a prayer on her lips. He collapsed upon her, his weight a welcome anchor, his face buried in her neck, his breath hot and ragged against her skin. They lay like that for long moments, tangled together, slick with sweat, hearts hammering in unison, the only sound their gradually slowing breaths. The world, with all its dangers and complexities, began to seep back into the edges of the room, but it felt different now, held at bay by the profound, unbreakable connection forged in their joining. Finally, he shifted, rolling onto his side, taking her with him, keeping her nestled against his body, her head on his good shoulder. He pulled the coverlet over them, his hand stroking her hair, her back, in a slow, soothing rhythm. No words were spoken. None were needed. The fear was still there, the threat of Finch and Kane a dark cloud on the horizon, the memory of the river's icy grasp and the gunfire still fresh. But as Eleanor lay wrapped in Marcus's arms, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, hearing the soft, even sound of his breathing, she knew a peace she had never thought possible. They were together. They had faced the abyss and returned. They had weaponized memory and passion against the darkness. And as sleep finally claimed her, pulling her down into warm, sated oblivion, the last thing she felt was the press of his lips against her forehead and the unshakable certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. The dangerous game was not over, but the players had been irrevocably changed, bound by a loyalty deeper than duty and a desire hotter than any fear. The final moves against the remaining shadows to be made not as soldier and pawn, but as partners, their fates intertwined in the quiet aftermath of passion and the lingering echo of the deadly ledger's truth. The deep, sated silence that followed their passionate union was a living thing in the chamber, thick with the scent of their joining, of wood smoke and spent oil, a profound peace that felt both hard-won and terrifyingly fragile. Eleanor lay curled against Marcus's side, her head on his good shoulder, her fingers tracing idle, possessive patterns on the sweat-damp skin of his chest, feeling the strong, steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm, a rhythm that echoed the lingering, delicious ache deep within her, a physical testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred between them. His good arm held her close, his hand splayed on the small of her back, holding her to him as if afraid she might vanish, his breath stirring her hair in a slow, even cadence that spoke of a contentment so profound it bordered on disbelief. For a long, suspended time, there were no words, no need for them. The language of touch, of shared breath, of bodies still humming with the aftershocks of release, said everything that needed to be said. Trust forged in fire, loyalty sworn in blood and passion, a future tentatively claimed from the jaws of a brutal past. But the world, with its cold realities and sharp-edged threats, could not be held at bay forever. The fire in the hearth crackled, a log shifting and sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness, a reminder of the world beyond this room, beyond this temporary sanctuary. Outside the thick stone walls of Thornfield, the night was cold and clear, the stars sharp and distant, and somewhere in the vast, sleeping countryside or in the bustling, shadowed corridors of power in London, men named Finch and Kane were likely plotting, their networks humming with the news of Vance's fall, their instincts for self-preservation undoubtedly screaming that a loose thread named Eleanor Street. Claire needed to be snipped, permanently. The memory of the ledger, its contents now a permanent, burning scar on her mind, felt heavier in the quiet aftermath. The names Finch, Kane, the Dover betrayal, the Bristol murder no longer abstract concepts but tangible enemies, men of influence and ruthlessness who would not simply wait for the axe to fall. Marcus felt the subtle tension return to her body, the slight stiffening against his side, and his hand stilled its soothing motion on her back. "What is it?" he murmured, his voice a low, sleep-roughened rumble against her ear. "The silence is too loud," she whispered back, the words barely audible. "It makes space for the thoughts, the what-ifs." She tilted her head back to look up at him, her gray eyes serious in the dim light. "Finch, Kane, they won't stop, will they? Renshaw's letter is on its way, but that takes time. And they have resources, reach." His jaw tightened, the soldier re-emerging from the lover, the blue of his eyes darkening with grim certainty. "No," he agreed, the word flat and hard. "They won't. They can't afford to. They'll be desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous kind." His arm tightened around her. "But they've lost the advantage of surprise. Denham knows. Renshaw knows. The evidence is documented and en route. We're no longer just two people running, we're the key witnesses in a case that will topple giants. That affords a certain protection. Or at least, makes eliminating us a far more complicated and risky proposition." He shifted, wincing only slightly, to look down at her, his expression fierce. "And they have to get through me first. And I am very, very hard to kill, as they are swiftly learning." A ghost of a smile touched her lips at his bravado, but the fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach. "They don't fight fair, Marcus. They use shadows and knives and accidents." "I know," he said, his voice softening. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "Which is why we won't give them a clean target. We stay at Thornfield under Denham's guard until Renshaw's word returns from London with a plan." crown protection, a safe house, whatever is necessary. He paused, his thumb stroking her cheek. This isn't a battle fought with pistols on a riverbank anymore, Eleanor. It's a war of information, of politics, of patience. And we hold the most powerful weapon, the truth, locked right here. He tapped her temple gently. And we hold it together. The simple declaration, together, held more power than any promise of safety. It acknowledged the danger but refused to be cowed by it. It spoke of a partnership, a shared burden, a united front. She nestled closer against him, drawing strength from his solidity, from the unwavering certainty in his voice. He was right. The game had changed. They were no longer prey simply fleeing predators, they were catalysts, the spark that would ignite a purge. The waiting would be its own kind of torment, a tense, watchful silence fraught with the fear of a knife in the dark or a paid off guard, but it was a silence they would face side by side. Together, she echoed, the word of vow whispered against his skin. She let her hand drift lower, over the ridged muscles of his abdomen, feeling him stir against her, a slow, answering heat beginning to push back the chill of fear. The future was uncertain, shadowed by powerful, ruthless enemies, but in this room, in this bed, they had carved out a fortress of their own making, built not of stone and mortar but of trust hard-earned and a passion that had proven stronger than terror. The dangerous game was indeed not over. In many ways, the most perilous phase, the waiting, the political maneuvering, the silent war of nerves, was just beginning. But as Marcus's mouth found hers again in a slow, deep kiss that promised not just pleasure but unwavering partnership, Eleanor knew that whatever moves Finch and Kane made next, they would be met not with a solitary, sheltered lady or a lone, disillusioned soldier, but with an unbreakable alliance forged in the fires of the deadly ledger's shadow, an alliance ready to face the final, treacherous moves on the board and claim the future that was rightfully theirs. The night stretched on, holding its breath outside the walls, but within, the silence was no longer a void to be feared, but a space to be filled with the quiet, steadfast certainty of two hearts beating as one, ready for the dawn and whatever it might bring. The dawn that broke over Thornfield Hall was a pale, hesitant thing, leaching the color from the stars and casting the rolling moors in shades of gray and muted purple, a cold, quiet light that promised nothing, offered no comfort, only the stark continuation of the previous day's tense uncertainty. Within the chamber, the warmth of the night had faded, replaced by a creeping chill that seeped through the stone walls, a grim reminder that the sanctuary of the room, of the bed, of Marcus's arms, was temporary, a fragile illusion that could not hold against the determined malice of their enemies. Eleanor awoke first, pulled from a fitful sleep not by a sound, but by the absence of it. The deep, pre-dawn stillness felt heavy, watchful, the calm before a storm she could feel gathering on the horizon, a pressure building in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the steady, strong beat of Marcus's heart beneath her ear, feeling the slow, even rise and fall of his chest, committing the sensation to memory, this precious, stolen peace. His face in sleep was younger, the harsh lines of pain and vigilance softened, the dark lashes stark against his pale skin, his lips slightly parted. He looked vulnerable, a stark contrast to the fierce, dangerous soldier who had faced down Vance, who had kissed her with such devastating possession hours before. Her heart ached with a fierce, protective love that was so new and so overwhelming it stole her breath. This man, with his stained past and his unwavering loyalty, who had fought his way through hell to reach her, was hers. And she would fight just as fiercely for him. As if sensing her wakefulness, his eyes fluttered open, the blue instantly alert, the soldier's instinct surfacing even before full consciousness, his arm tightening around her automatically. His gaze found hers, and the vulnerability vanished, replaced by a warm, sleepy intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Morning," he rasped, his voice rough with sleep, a small, rare smile touching his lips as he leaned down to brush a kiss against her forehead. The simple intimacy of it, the domestic normality in the face of such extraordinary peril, was almost more than she could bear. She stretched up to meet his lips with her own in a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of sleep and shared secrets. "Morning," she whispered back, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw, rough with stubble. For a few precious minutes, they simply lay there, wrapped in each other, the outside world held at bay by the warmth of the bed and the strength of their connection, a silent communion that spoke more eloquently than any words of the bond forged in fire and ice and passion. But the reality of their situation could not be ignored for long. The bandage on his arm needed changing. The faint, ominous blush of pink around the edges of the linen spoke of a fever waiting to resurge if not diligently fought. The journey, the stress, the night's activities, had taken their toll. And outside the door, Finch and Kane's shadow lengthened with every passing moment. They rose together, the mood shifting from tender to purposeful. Eleanor helped him with the bandage, her touch gentle but efficient, applying a fresh poultice Martha had sent with them with instructions, her heart clenching at the way he gritted his teeth against the pain but made no sound. This was their reality now, tending wounds, watching windows, waiting for the next blow to fall. They dressed in silence, the borrowed clothes feeling like a disguise, a temporary skin for people who were no longer the lady of Blackwood Manor and the mysterious captain, but something else entirely, two souls fused together by circumstance and choice into a single, determined entity. A firm knock on the door heralded Denham himself, his face grim in the gray morning light. "Riders approaching," he said without preamble, his voice low. "From the east. A half-dozen. Flying Renshaw's colors, but we're taking no chances. Stay here. Bar the door." He left as abruptly as he came, the sound of his bootsteps fading rapidly down the corridor, followed by the shouted orders to his guards, the metallic snick of bolts being drawn and weapons being made ready. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by the familiar, chilling grip of fear. Marcus was at the window instantly, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters, his body tense, his good hand resting on the pistol he had laid on the bedside table. Eleanor stood beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind conjuring images of treachery, of Renshaw's men turned assassins, of Finch's reach extending even here. The minutes stretched, each one an eternity of strained silence broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of challenge and response from the courtyard below. Then, finally, the sound of the main gate creaking open, followed by the clatter of hooves on cobbles, voices raised but not in anger, in brisk, official tones. Marcus let out a slow breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "It's all right," he said, though his voice was still tight. "It's Renshaw's men. Official." Soon after, another knock, this one less urgent. Denham's guard announced that Sir William Renshaw himself had arrived, with an escort, and requested their presence in the main hall. The atmosphere in Thornfield's Great Hall was markedly different from the previous day's tense interviews. Sir William Renshaw stood before the massive hearth, his traveling cloak still damp with morning dew, his expression not grim, but filled with a fierce, triumphant light. In his hand, he held not a sealed letter, but a sheaf of official-looking documents bearing elaborate seals. Denham stood beside him, a similar, if more restrained, satisfaction on his face. "Captain Thorne, Lady Eleanor," Renshaw began, his voice ringing with authority in the cavernous space. "I come with news that could not wait for a messenger." The response from London was swifter than I dared hope. "The evidence you provided, Lady Eleanor, your flawless, courageous testimony, has acted like a thunderclap in Whitehall." He brandished the papers. "Warrants, signed by the Lord Chief Justice himself, for the immediate arrest of Lord Peregrine Finch and Sir Geoffrey Kane on charges of high treason, corruption, and murder." The words hung in the air, monumental, almost unbelievable. Eleanor felt a dizzying wave of relief so potent her knees threatened to buckle. Marcus's hand found the small of her back, steadying her, his own expression one of stark, stunned amazement. "So soon?" Marcus asked, his voice hushed with disbelief. Renshaw's smile was sharp. "The names, the dates, the amounts, it was irrefutable. And it seems your testimony, Captain, regarding Vance's operations and your own separation from them, provided the final, crucial context that convinced even the most skeptical. It appears you have friends in high places you were unaware of, veterans who spoke for your character. The dam has broken. Finch was taken at his club an hour before I left Hawkridge. Kane was apprehended trying to board a ship at Dover. Their networks are being rolled up as we speak." He stepped forward, his gaze encompassing them both. "You have done it. You have not only saved yourselves, but you have performed an incalculable service to the crown. The Viper's nest is being rooted out, thanks to your bravery and your resolve." The relief that washed over Eleanor was so profound it was physical, a warmth spreading through her chest, melting the icy knot of fear that had resided there for what felt like a lifetime. It was over. Truly over. The shadow of the ledger was finally, completely, lifted. She looked up at Marcus, seeing the same stunned relief reflected in his blue eyes, along with a dawning sense of a future he had perhaps never dared to envision, a future free of Vance's shadow, free of the relentless pursuit. A future. Together. Denham stepped forward, clapping a hand on Marcus's good shoulder. "You both deserve a lifetime of peace after this," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gruff with emotion. "And you shall have it. Your names will be cleared, publicly. Your safety is assured. You are heroes, though I doubt the world will ever know the full story, and perhaps that is for the best." Later, after the details had been discussed, after plans for their secure return to Blackwood had been made, after Renshaw and his men had departed to oversee the final stages of the operation in London, Eleanor and Marcus found themselves alone in the courtyard, watching the sun finally break above the horizon, painting the moors in golden rose. The air was cold and clean, smelling of damp earth and hope. Marcus turned to her, taking both her hands in his thumbs stroking her knuckles. The intensity in his eyes was no longer that of a soldier assessing a threat, but of a man looking at his entire future. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and heartfelt, "it's done. The past is finally buried. The ledger's shadow is gone." He took a deep breath. "I know I am not a man of land or title. My hands are not clean. My future is unwritten. But it is a future I want to write with you. Every word of it. Will you?" He hesitated, the confident captain suddenly unsure, vulnerable. "Will you let me build that future with you? As my wife?" The joy that erupted in Eleanor's chest was brighter than the dawn, more powerful than any fear that had come before it. She looked at this man, her soldier, her protector, her love, who had fought his own demons to stand beside her, who had offered her not just safety, but a partnership, a shared life. She squeezed his hands, her gray eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. "Yes," she said, the word a vow, a promise, a beginning. "Yes, Marcus Thorne. 1,000 times, yes." His smile then was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, transforming his face, erasing the last traces of pain and hardship, filled with a joy that mirrored her own. He pulled her into his arms, careful of his wound but crushing her to him nonetheless, and kissed her there, in the golden light of the new day, under the vast, open sky, a kiss that sealed their hard-won peace and promised a lifetime of mornings just like this one, free from shadows, filled only with the light of their love. The dangerous game was finally, truly, over, and they had won the greatest prize of all. Each other. The golden light of the newfound day seemed to seep into the very stones of Thornfield's courtyard, warming the ancient granite and painting the world in hues of rose and amber, a stark, beautiful contrast to the gray dread that had cloaked them for so long. The word yes hung between them, not as a simple answer but as a fundamental rewriting of their universe, a seismic shift that made the very air taste different, sweeter, charged with a potential so vast it was dizzying. Marcus's kiss, there in the open under the wide Yorkshire sky, was not one of desperate passion or fierce claiming, but of a profound, soul-deep reverence, a sealing of the vow Eleanor had just made, a promise of 1,000 tomorrows built not on survival but on the solid, unshakable foundation of this hard-won love. When they finally drew apart, breathless and smiling, their foreheads rested together, their eyes closed, simply breathing each other in, sharing the same sun-warmed air, the same unimaginable peace. The sound of a discreetly cleared throat broke the spell. Denham stood a few paces away, his stern features softened by a rare, genuine smile. "I shall take that as a yes," he said dryly, though his eyes twinkled. "Congratulations to you both. You've earned this happiness 10 times over." He gestured towards the hall. "Come, break your fast. There are arrangements to discuss." The meal in Thornfield's cavernous dining hall was a surreal affair. Plates of eggs, ham, and warm bread sat before them, simple, nourishing food that tasted like a feast after the deprivation and fear. Denham, playing the unlikely role of jovial host, spoke of settlements and licenses, of sending word to Eleanor's father, who was still thankfully absent in the north and blissfully unaware of the maelstrom that had nearly consumed his daughter and his estate. He spoke of Blackwood, of it being safe to return, of it being their future home. The normality of it, the mundane planning of a life together, was almost more overwhelming than the danger had been. Eleanor found herself laughing, a real, unforced sound that seemed to startle even her, as Marcus, with a deadpan expression, began debating the merits of various tenant farmers with Denham as if he'd been managing estates all his life. The soldier was receding, the protector relaxing, and the man beneath, sharp, witty, and with a dry humor she was only just discovering, was emerging into the sunlight. The journey back to Blackwood Manor, later that day, was a different world entirely. The same carriage, the same roads, but the tension was gone, replaced by a buoyant, almost giddy sense of release. They rode not as fugitives, but as victors, with Denham's personal guard as an honor escort, not a defensive necessity. The countryside, once a landscape of threatening shadows and potential ambush, was now simply beautiful, rolling green hills dotted with sheep, ancient drystone walls, and hawthorn trees bursting into bloom. Eleanor sat beside Marcus, her hand tucked firmly in his, her head on his shoulder, watching it all pass by, pointing out a kestrel hovering high above, a stream sparkling in the sun. He would press a kiss to her hair, his arm around her, his thumb drawing slow, absent circles on her shoulder, a constant, quiet communication of his presence, his joy, his love. They spoke of everything and nothing, of books they'd read, of places they'd seen, of a future that now stretched before them, limitless and bright. He confessed a desire to learn the workings of the estate properly, to be a true partner to her, not just its master by marriage. She teased him about his terrible handwriting, a fact revealed when he'd tried to jot down a note for Denham, and he'd retaliated by pulling her closer and murmuring that he had other, far more important skills, making her blush and laugh. When Blackwood's familiar chimneys appeared on the horizon, a surge of complex emotion washed over Eleanor, not the oppressive dread of before, but a fierce, possessive love for the ancient stones, a determination to fill its halls with the laughter and life that had been so absent for so long. The staff, led by a visibly relieved and tearful Mrs. Haversham, the housekeeper, lined the steps to greet them, their faces a mixture of curiosity and joy. The story, of course, had been sanitized for their consumption, a tale of Captain Thorne's heroism in thwarting a plot by dangerous fugitives, of Lady Eleanor's bravery, of the tragic death of Magistrate Henderson, a hero. They were welcomed as conquering heroes returning home. And that night, in her own room, their room now, as Marcus's few belongings were quietly moved in by a discreet footman, the final ghosts were laid to rest. Their lovemaking was different again. There was no desperate edge, no frantic need to affirm life in the face of death. It was slower, more exploratory, a luxurious rediscovery of each other's bodies in the comfort of a familiar, safe space. The large, canopied bed that had once felt like a prison of boredom now became a realm of whispered secrets and shared laughter, of slow, tender kisses and leisurely caresses that mapped every inch of skin, learning the new landscapes of peace and the old scars of past battles. Afterward, tangled in the soft linen sheets, sated and languid, they talked for hours in the dark, the moon casting silver stripes across the floor. They spoke of Julian, of the difficult path of forgiveness and responsibility that lay ahead for him, a path they would navigate together. They spoke of Vance, Finch, and Kane, their fate now in the hands of the law, a closed chapter. And they spoke of themselves, of the children they might have, of the life they would build within these walls, a life not of stifling predictability, but of chosen partnership and deep, abiding love. The following weeks passed in a blissful, sun-drenched haze. Blackwood Manor, once a gilded cage, was transformed. The windows were thrown open to let in the spring air, the sound of hammering came from the east wing as repairs began, not out of necessity, but as a symbol of renewal. Marcus, his arm healing well, threw himself into learning the intricacies of the estate with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to military campaigns, often striding into the library with mud on his boots and a sheaf of reports, seeking Eleanor's opinion, valuing her knowledge, treating her as the true partner she was. They walked the grounds every day, his hand in hers, rediscovering the gardens, the folly, the pet cemetery now devoid of its terrible secret, making new memories to overlay the old, frightening ones. They picnicked by the lake where he'd nearly drowned, the water now sparkling innocently under the sun, a testament to their survival. The wedding was a quiet, simple affair in the Blackwood Chapel, attended only by Denham, a recovered and chastened Julian, and a few trusted staff. Eleanor wore a simple gown of cream silk, and Marcus stood straight and proud in a new coat of dark blue, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows, not of duty or convenience, but of love, loyalty, and a future chosen freely. As the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Marcus leaned down, his voice for her ears only, a low, heartfelt whisper that contained the entirety of their journey, "My lady. My wife. My Eleanor." And as he kissed her, the first kiss of their married life, the sun broke through the stained glass window, painting them in a rainbow of light, a blessing on the new life they had fought for and won. The dangerous game was not just over, it had been transformed into the most beautiful, enduring partnership, a quiet, steadfast love story written in the aftermath of the storm, its promise stretching out before them as long and bright as the sunlit Yorkshire moors. The golden peace that settled over Blackwood Manor in the weeks following their wedding was a tangible thing, a balm that seeped into the ancient stones and the very souls of its inhabitants. The oppressive silence that had once clung to the corridors was replaced by the sound of laughter echoing from the library, the brisk, purposeful tread of Marcus's boots on the parquet floors as he immersed himself in the estate's ledgers with a focus that had once been reserved for battlefield strategy, and the gentle murmur of Eleanor's voice as she directed the airing of long-closed rooms and the rejuvenation of the neglected gardens. It was a life of quiet, profound contentment, a world built anew from the ashes of fear and betrayal. Yet, for all the sun-drenched normality, the shadows of the past were not so easily banished. They lingered not as threats, but as ghosts that sometimes whispered in the quiet moments, reminders of the fire that had forged them. It was on one such evening, with a soft spring rain pattering against the windows of the library, that the ghost stirred. They were curled together on a large sofa before a crackling fire, Eleanor's head resting on Marcus's shoulder as she read aloud from a book of poetry, his good arm around her, his eyes closed, not in sleep, but in simple, deep contentment. The peace was absolute, a world contained within the warm, firelit room. Then, a particular line, a metaphor about a hidden fault line beneath a tranquil field, made her voice falter. The words, so innocuous, somehow resonated with a chilling familiarity. She fell silent, the book lowering to her lap. Marcus felt the shift in her immediately, the subtle tension that replaced her languid ease. He opened his eyes, looking down at her concernedly. "Eleanor, what is it?" She didn't answer for a moment, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames, her brow furrowed in concentration. The ledger. The endless columns of figures, the coded entries, the damning names. She had thought her mind had etched every detail, but memory was a strange creature, hiding fragments in deep, unexplored corners, only to reveal them at the most unexpected moments. "The Antwerp shipment," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain and the fire's crackle. "The last entry in the ledger. The massive payment to Kane's alias through the Genoese bank, Renshaw's clerk wrote it down. I recited it. But, there was a sub-entry. A smaller sum, diverted on the same date. A separate account. I saw it, I know I did, but in the stress of it all, it didn't register. It was just another line in a sea of corruption." She sat up straight, turning to face him, her gray eyes wide with dawning alarm. "Marcus, the account wasn't just a random number. It was initialed. Not Kane's. Not Vance's. A. W. The initials hung in the cozy room, a drop of ice water in the warm air. Marcus's body went still, the relaxed soldier instantly replaced by the alert operative. His blue eyes narrowed, all traces of sleepiness gone. "A.W., he repeated, the letters sounding foreign and ominous. "That wasn't among the names we gave Renshaw. It wasn't in any of the testimonies." A cold dread, so familiar and so unwelcome, began to coil in Eleanor's stomach. "Who is A.W.?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Another player. Someone Vance and Kane were paying off. Or, someone working with them, hidden even deeper." Marcus was already on his feet, moving to the desk where a copy of their sworn testimony, sent by Renshaw for their records, lay in a drawer. He pulled it out, his movements swift and precise, his face a mask of concentration. He scanned the pages, his finger tracing down the lines describing the Antwerp transaction. "It's not here," he said, his voice grim. "Your original recitation is here, verbatim. The payment to Kane. But the diverted sum, the initials, they're missing from the transcript." He looked up at her, his expression stark. The clerk must have missed it. Or, he didn't finish the thought, but the implication was clear. Or it had been deliberately omitted. The cozy sanctuary of the library suddenly felt fragile, the walls too thin, the firelight casting long, leaping shadows that seemed to hold new secrets. The peace of the last few weeks shattered, replaced by the old, familiar chill of conspiracy. They had toppled Vance, Finch, and Kane, but what if they had only pruned the branch, not severed the root? What if AW was still out there, anonymous, powerful, and now aware that his or her secret had very nearly been exposed? Marcus was at her side in an instant, kneeling before her, taking her cold hands in his. His touch was warm, steadying. "This changes nothing about our safety here," he said, his voice low and firm, his gaze holding hers. "Denham's men are still posted. Renshaw's protection is in place. But we cannot ignore this. AW is a loose thread. And in my experience, loose threads have a way of unraveling everything." He took a deep breath. "We need to get this to Renshaw. Immediately. But we cannot trust a letter. Not with this." Eleanor's mind raced, the old fears threatening to surge back, but she fought them down, anchored by the resoluteness in his eyes. She was not the same terrified woman in the lilac silk. She was Eleanor Thorne, who had faced down killers and memory itself. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady now. Marcus's jaw was set, a plan already forming behind his intense blue eyes. "We go to London," he stated. "Ourselves. We take the original copy of the testimony. We go directly to Renshaw and show him the discrepancy. We make him see what his clerk missed, or what someone might have wanted missed." He stood, pulling her to her feet with him. "We finish this. Completely. No more shadows. No more ghosts." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. Together. The word was their talisman, their strength. The journey would be a risk. London was Finch and Kane's territory, their web of influence perhaps not fully dismantled. AW was an unknown, a hidden danger. But the thought of living the rest of their lives with this secret hanging over them, this unanswered question poisoning their hard-won peace, was unthinkable. Eleanor nodded, her own determination solidifying. Together, she echoed. The decision was made. The quiet life was once again postponed, not by external threat, but by their own unwavering need for truth, for finality. The next morning, under a sky the color of lead, a closed carriage bearing the Blackwood crest rolled away from the manor, not on a pleasure trip, but on a new, urgent mission. Inside, Eleanor and Marcus sat side by side, hands clasped. They were no longer fleeing victims, they were active hunters, armed with a single, elusive clue in the unshakable bond that had already carried them through hell. The dangerous game, they realized, had one final, hidden move to play, and they would play it together, on their own terms, ready to face the last remaining shadow of the deadly ledger. The journey to London was a tense, jolting counterpoint to the blissful peace they had so recently carved out at Blackwood, the carriage interior feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a cage hurling them towards an uncertain and potentially lethal confrontation. The gentle Yorkshire landscape swiftly gave way to the busier, muddier roads leading south, the cheerful spring sunshine obscured by a low, threatening blanket of gray cloud that seemed to mirror the ominous new shadow, AW, looming over them. Eleanor sat rigidly on the plush seat, her hand clasped tightly in Marcus's, her knuckles white, her mind relentlessly turning over the two letters, trying to force her memory to conjure a face, a name, anything more than those chillingly anonymous initials. Marcus was a statue of controlled vigilance beside her, his body angled to watch the road behind them through a small gap in the curtain, his good hand resting near the pistol concealed beneath his greatcoat, his blue eyes narrowed, constantly scanning, assessing every fellow traveler, every inn they passed, every potential threat. The easy laughter and shared dreams of the past weeks were gone, replaced by the grim, familiar language of survival, a silent communication of shared glances and tightened grips that spoke volumes. They spoke little, the weight of their mission stifling casual conversation, the rain that began to fall, hammering a frantic rhythm on the carriage roof, feeling like a portent of the storm they were riding into. They changed horses at post inns with swift, efficient silence, refusing offers of food or rest, their focus absolute. The miles blurred into a monotonous, anxiety-ridden tapestry of muddy fields and dreary villages, the comfort of the carriage doing little to ease the ache of tension in Eleanor's shoulders or the constant, low throb of pain in Marcus's healing arm, a persistent reminder of how quickly safety could shatter. It was deep into the following day, with the sprawling, smoky pall of London finally staining the horizon, that the first sign of trouble came. Their carriage, navigating the crowded, rutted approach road, was forced to a slow crawl behind a heavily laden hay wagon. Marcus, instantly alert, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the driver of the wagon, who seemed to be making unnecessarily clumsy work of his task. Easy, Marcus murmured to Eleanor, his voice a low vibration in the confined space. This feels wrong. No sooner had the words left his lips than two rough-looking men on horseback emerged from a narrow side lane, their faces obscured by low-hatted hats and scarves, their movements too coordinated, too purposeful for simple highwaymen. They drew pistols, not aiming at the driver, but directly at the carriage horses, their intent clear: disable, stop, ambush. Down! Marcus roared, his body moving before the shout had fully left his mouth. He lunged across the carriage, shoving Eleanor to the floorboards, covering her body with his own just as the first shot rang out, deafeningly loud, followed by the scream of a wounded horse and the violent lurch of the carriage as it slewed sideways, its forward momentum brutally halted. The world dissolved into chaos. Shouts from their guards, the panicked whinnying of horses, the sharp retort of return gunfire. The carriage tilted precariously. Marcus held her tight, his body a shield, his breath hot and rapid against her ear. "Stay down," he gritted out. "Whatever happens, stay down and stay silent." Eleanor clung to him, her face pressed into the rough wool of his coat, breathing in the scent of him, leather, gunpowder, and that underlying, steadfast strength that had become her anchor in every storm. She heard the crunch of boots on the road, the sound of a struggle, a guttural cry cut short. Then, a voice, cold and oddly familiar, slicing through the din: "The woman. Just the woman. Kill the guards. Leave the driver." The voice, it tugged at a memory, a fragment from a past life, a polite, cultured tone laced with an inhuman coldness that made her blood run ice cold. A.W. It had to be. They hadn't just been followed, they'd been anticipated. Their route, their purpose, known. The betrayal was not just in the missed transcript, it was deep, personal, and terrifyingly efficient. Marcus's body went rigid above her. He had heard it too. Recognition flared in his eyes, followed by a wave of pure, incandescent fury. This was no random attack, it was a surgical strike. And the voice belonged to a ghost from his past, a ghost with a name and a face he knew. With a strength born of that fury, he rolled off her, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. "The strongbox," he hissed to her, his eyes blazing. "Under the seat. My secondary pistol. Now." Eleanor scrambled in the dim, tilted space, her fingers finding the hidden catch, pulling out a smaller, deadly-looking weapon. She'd never held one before, its weight cold and alien in her hand, but Marcus's trust, his desperate need, pushed the fear aside. He kicked the carriage door open, using it as cover, firing twice towards the sound of the voice. The shots were answered by a volley that splintered the doorframe above their heads. "They're flanking us," one of their guards yelled, his voice strained with pain. "Jenkins is down." They were pinned, outnumbered, their mobility gone. Marcus's mind raced, calculating odds, terrain, seconds ticking away towards certain capture or death. His gaze swept the roadside, a steep, bramble-choked ditch, beyond it, a dense copse of trees. A desperate, terrible plan formed. He turned to Eleanor, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Listen to me. When I say run, you run for those trees. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. I'll be right behind you." He pressed the secondary pistol into her hand, closing her fingers around the grip. "Aim for the center of mass. Squeeze, don't pull. Only if you have to." Before she could protest, he rose, firing 3 rapid shots out the shattered doorway, creating a momentary suppression. "Now, Eleanor, go." He shoved her towards the opposite door, the one facing the ditch. She didn't hesitate. She flung the door open and launched herself out, stumbling down the steep, muddy embankment, thorns tearing at her clothes and skin. She heard Marcus's pistol bark again behind her, followed by a shout of pain, not his. She scrambled up the far side, plunging into the welcome gloom of the trees, her heart hammering against her ribs, the cold weight of the pistol a terrifying comfort in her hand. She risked a glance back. Marcus was halfway across the road, using the crippled carriage for cover, firing methodically, keeping their attackers pinned. Then she saw him, a man emerging from the side lane, well-dressed, calm, aiming a dueling pistol with a chilling precision. A.W. The face was one she knew, a face from London ballrooms, from her father's club, a man known for his quiet philanthropy and impeccable taste. The shock of it froze her for a split second. Marcus saw him too, pivoting to fire, but he was a fraction too slow. The man's pistol shot was unnervingly accurate. It struck Marcus high in the chest, near his already wounded shoulder. He staggered back, a choked gasp escaping him, his own pistol falling from his grip as he crashed down into the muddy ditch, out of sight. A scream lodged in Eleanor's throat, strangled by sheer, paralyzing terror. Marcus, the well-dressed man, A.W., gestured curtly to his men. "Find her. The woods. She can't have gone far." He himself began to descend into the ditch, towards where Marcus had fallen, his intention horrifyingly clear, to finish the job. Eleanor stood frozen for a heartbeat, torn between the imperative to run and the devastating need to go to Marcus, to save him, to die with him if necessary. But his words echoed in her mind, a command born of love and desperation: "Run. Don't look back." And she knew, with a certainty that shattered her heart, that his sacrifice would be for nothing if she was caught. The ledger's final secret would die with her, and A.W. would win. Grief and rage, white-hot and terrifying, fused within her, overriding the fear. She turned and ran deeper into the woods, the branches whipping at her face, the mud sucking at her boots, the cold, unfamiliar pistol gripped tightly in her hand, not as a woman fleeing, but as the final, furious guardian of a truth that had already cost too much, her tears blending with the rain as she vanished into the green-gray gloom, leaving behind the love of her life lying motionless in a muddy ditch, the outcome of his desperate gambit unknown, the hunt for the last witness now entering its most desperate and lethal phase. The dense, dripping woods swallowed Eleanor whole, a tangled labyrinth of gray-green gloom where the pounding of her own heart was the only rhythm, a frantic, terrified drumbeat against the suffocating silence broken only by the squelch of her boots in the sodden leaf litter and the ragged, sobbing gasps she couldn't suppress, the image of Marcus falling, the stark bloom of crimson high on his chest, seared onto the back of her eyelids every time she blinked, a horrifying tableau playing on a loop that threatened to shatter her sanity with each stumbling step she took deeper into the unknown, the cold, deadly weight of the pistol in her hand a mocking reminder of his trust in her own terrifying inadequacy, her mind screaming his name with every fiber of her being even as her legs, driven by a primal instinct for survival he had hammered into her, carried her forward, away from him, the thorns and low-hanging branches tearing at her hair and clothes like grasping fingers, the brambles holding onto her as if the forest itself were conspiring with A.W. to slow her down, to deliver her to the men whose crashing pursuit she could hear drawing closer, their rough voices calling to each other, a coordinated, lethal hunt closing in on its panicked quarry. She was lost, disoriented, the gray sky invisible through the thick canopy, no sun to guide her, only the relentless, cold drizzle that soaked through to her skin, the misery of it a physical echo of the despair clawing at her insides. Marcus, oh God, Marcus, please be alive, please hold on, the prayer a silent scream in her mind, a desperate mantra to keep her from collapsing under the weight of a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. A shout, terrifyingly close to her left, spurred her into a burst of frantic speed, her lungs burning, her side stitching with a sharp pain, the pistol feeling heavier and more useless with every step, a tool she had no idea how to wield effectively, only Marcus's brief, urgent instruction: aim for the center, squeeze, don't pull, echoing in her ears, a ghost of his presence, his strength, the last thing he had given her. She crashed through a final wall of ferns and stumbled into a small, rocky clearing dominated by the skeletal remains of a long dead oak tree, its trunk split and hollowed by lightning and time, a dark cavity yawning like a mouth, and with no other option, no breath left to run, she plunged into the narrow, dank space, squeezing herself into the rotten, earthy-smelling darkness, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible, the pistol held in both trembling hands, pointed shakily towards the opening, her breath held, every sense screamingly alert, listening to the sounds of her pursuers converging on the clearing, their boots scuffing on stone, their voices low and frustrated. Lost her, one grunted. Bitch is quick, she can't have gone far. Spread out. Check the thickets. He wants her found. Alive, if possible. But the priority is the silence. The voice was colder, flatter than the others. A.W.'s lieutenant. The rain pattered softly on the leaves outside her hiding place, the sound magnified in the tense silence. She could hear them moving around the clearing, their footsteps circling her tree, her heart hammering so violently she was certain they must hear it, a telltale drumbeat betraying her position. A shadow fell across the opening of the hollow. A man's boot, inches from her face, kicked idly at a rock. "Nothing here," he called out, his voice so close she could smell the damp wool of his coat and the stale tobacco on his breath. "Let's move east. She's probably heading for the river." The boot moved away. The footsteps receded. The voices grew fainter, swallowed by the woods. Still, she didn't move, frozen in her dank refuge, the adrenaline slowly leaching away, leaving her shaking and cold, the reality of her situation crashing down upon her. She was alone. Alone in the wilderness, hunted by professional killers. Marcus was gone, likely dead in a ditch, his lifeblood seeping into the mud because of her, because of the secrets in her head. The ledger, the names, the truth, it had cost her everything. A sob finally broke free, a harsh, ragged sound she muffled against the rotten wood, the tears coming hot and fast, the pistol dropping to the leaf litter as she wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, giving into the wave of utter, hopeless despair. But as the storm of grief passed, leaving her hollowed out and numb, a strange, cold clarity began to take its place. Marcus hadn't died for her to give up. He had fought, shot, and fallen to give her this chance, this fleeting moment of life. That monster from her own world, with his polite smile and his murderous heart, thought she was just a frightened society lady, a rabbit to be run down. He thought the threat ended with Marcus. He was wrong. The grief curdled, transforming in the crucible of her fear and loss into something else, something hard and sharp and deadly, a burning, incandescent rage. She would not be his rabbit. She would be his reckoning. Slowly, stiffly, she reached down and picked up the pistol again, her grip firmer now, her trembling stilled by the cold fire of her newfound resolve. She would survive. She would get to Renshaw. She would speak the name she now knew, the face she now saw so clearly in her mind, the final, hidden viper in the nest. For Marcus. For herself. For the future they had been robbed of. Cautiously, she peered out of the hollow. The clearing was empty, the woods silent except for the rain. Using skills she'd learned watching him, she oriented herself by the faint flow of water running down the bark of the trees, guessing the direction of the river, and therefore, the road. She wouldn't run blindly. She would move with purpose. She was Eleanor Thorne, and she was done running. She was now the hunter. Stepping out of the hollow, her clothes torn and muddy, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but her back straight and her eyes dry and blazing with a cold, furious light, she began to move, not away from the road, but parallel to it, a shadow in the gray woods, the pistol a familiar, comforting weight in her hand, her heart no longer a drum of fear but a steady, determined beat, a silent vow whispered on the rain-filled wind. "I'm coming for you, A.W. I remember everything." The dangerous game had reached its final, desperate play, and the sole surviving player, armed with grief, rage, and an unforgettable memory, stepped out of the shadows to make her move. The resolve that had ignited within Eleanor was a cold, hard flame, burning away the last vestiges of terror and despair, leaving behind a crystalline clarity of purpose that was more terrifying than any fear she had yet known. She was no longer Lady Eleanor Street, Clare of Blackwood Manor, the sheltered, bored ornament to society. She was a vessel of vengeance, a living weapon forged in the fires of loss and betrayal, her mind the only remaining repository of a truth so damning it had already cost her everything that mattered. The pistol in her hand was no longer an alien, frightening object, it was an extension of her will, a cold, metallic promise of the justice she would deliver. Moving with a stealth she hadn't known she possessed, a primal instinct awakened by desperation and rage, she became a ghost in the rain-soaked woods, her senses hyper-alert, every rustle of a leaf, every drip of water from a branch, a piece of information to be processed. She used the terrain as Marcus had taught her by example, keeping to the thicker undergrowth for cover, pausing frequently to listen, her ears straining to separate the natural sounds of the forest from the ominous crunch of booted feet or the low murmur of pursuing voices. She heard them, distant but persistent, a pack of hounds still on the scent, but their movements seemed more scattered now, less coordinated, their frustration evident in the occasional sharp curse that carried through the damp air. They were searching blindly, and she, with a single, fixed goal, held the advantage of direction. The river. Marcus's last, desperate gambit had been to get her across the road towards the woods and the river beyond. It was a landmark, a potential path, and the last place she had seen him. The need to know his fate was a physical ache, a compulsion that warred with the logical part of her brain screaming that to go back was suicide, that if he was alive, he would want her to flee, to survive, to deliver the truth. But the thought of leaving him there, wounded and alone, of not knowing, was an agony she could not bear. Her path became a wide, cautious arc, skirting the edge of the woods parallel to the road, her progress slow and painstaking, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound a potential threat. The light began to fail, the gray afternoon deepening into a premature, rain-lashed dusk, the shadows lengthening and merging into a uniform, oppressive gloom. The temperature dropped, the dampness seeping through her torn clothes, making her shiver violently, but the cold was a distant sensation, secondary to the burning focus in her mind. Finally, through a break in the trees, she saw it. The muddy ditch, the wreck of their carriage still canted at a grotesque angle, one dead horse lying in a heap, the other gone, probably cut loose. The scene was deserted, silent but for the relentless patter of rain on the battered wood and the muddy ground. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart a frantic, painful hammer against her ribs. She scanned the ditch, her eyes desperately searching for a sign of him, praying for movement, for a groan, for anything. There, near the bottom of the slope, a darker patch in the mud, a shape that didn't belong. She was moving before she could stop herself, half sliding, half falling down the slippery embankment, her hands scrabbling in the cold muck, her eyes fixed on the shape. It was a body. One of Denham's guards, Jenkins, his sightless eyes staring up at the weeping sky, a dark hole in his chest. A fresh wave of grief and horror washed over her, but she forced herself to look past him, her gaze sweeping the ditch. No Marcus. No sign of a struggle. No blood trail leading away. He was simply gone. The relief was so potent it made her lightheaded, followed instantly by a new, chilling fear. Had AW's men taken him? Was he even now being tortured for information he didn't have? Or had he, somehow, miraculously, survived and crawled away? A sound, the distant but unmistakable jingle of harness and the creak of a wagon, jolted her from her thoughts. Peering cautiously over the lip of the ditch, she saw a farmer's cart approaching on the road, drawn by a single, plodding horse, an old man hunched under a sodden blanket on the driver's seat. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but it was also possibly her only chance. Hiding the pistol in the folds of her muddy skirt, she scrambled up onto the road, waving her arms, her heart in her mouth. The old man pulled his horse to a stop, his eyes wide with alarm and suspicion at the sight of her. A bedraggled, wild-eyed woman in torn, expensive clothes, covered in mud and shivering. "Please," she begged, her voice hoarse and trembling, pouring every ounce of her remaining strength into sounding like a victim of a simple robbery, a lost traveler. "Highwaymen, they attacked our carriage, my husband, they took him. Please, you must help me. I need to get to London, to the magistrate, Sir William Renshaw. It's a matter of life and death." The old man's eyes softened slightly, though caution remained. "Highwayman, ye say. Nasty business on this road of late. Man, I'm sorry, Mrs." He glanced around nervously, as if expecting the brigands to reappear. "I'm headed to market in the next village, not London. But I can take ye that far. Ye can get the mail coach from there. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. It was away from here." "Thank you," Eleanor breathed, the words heartfelt. She climbed up onto the hard, wooden seat beside him, pulling the offered corner of his damp blanket around her shoulders, the pistol a hidden, cold comfort against her leg. As the cart lurched into motion, she risked one last look back at the ditch, at the scene of the ambush, a silent promise echoing in her heart. "I will find you, Marcus. And I will make them pay." The cart carried her away from the immediate danger, the old man chatting nervously about the state of the roads, but Eleanor was no longer listening. Her mind was already in London, navigating the treacherous waters of power and corruption, her target clear, her weapon not the pistol in her lap, but the two damning initials and the face that went with them, seared into her memory forever. The hunter was on the move, her grief a cloak and her rage a compass, heading straight for the heart of the viper's nest. The farmer's cart was a slow, creaking purgatory, each turn of the wheels a torment of impatience and gnawing fear. The old man's well-meaning chatter a distant buzz against the roaring in Eleanor's ears, her body vibrating with a desperate need for speed, for action, her mind a whirlwind of horrific images, Marcus falling, the cold finality in AW's eyes, the bloody mud of the ditch, all underscored by the relentless, chilling mantra of her new purpose: find Renshaw. Speak the name. Make them pay. The pistol, heavy and cold against her thigh beneath the rough blanket, was a constant, grim reminder of the world she now inhabited, a world of violence and stark choices, a world where the polished veneer of society hid a rotten, murderous core. The village, when they finally reached it, was a dismal cluster of wet stone buildings, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. The old man pointed her towards a dimly lit inn, the hub for the mail coach. "The London coach comes through near midnight," he said, his face creased with sympathy. "Ye can wait in the taproom. Get yourself warm." He refused the few coins she offered, touched by her plight. "Godspeed, missus. I hope ye find her man." The taproom was a haze of smoke and the low murmur of voices, farmers and tradesmen drinking away the damp chill. Eleanor found a shadowed corner, keeping the hood of her ruined cloak up, her face averted, the pistol a hidden weight of potential violence in her lap. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat, every raised voice made her flinch. She was an exposed nerve, raw and screamingly alert, the memory of the ambush playing over and over, each time ending with Marcus's body hitting the mud. Was he alive? Had they taken him? Was he lying in a ditch somewhere, bleeding out, thinking she had abandoned him? The questions were a special kind of torture, each one a knife twist in her already shattered heart. She forced them down, locking them away behind a wall of cold fury. Emotion was a luxury she could not afford. Survival was a tactic. Vengeance was the goal. The hours crawled by. She sipped a tankard of weak, lukewarm ale she didn't want, the taste bitter on her tongue, her ears straining for the sound of the coach horn. Finally, well past midnight, it came, a distant, mournful sound that sent a jolt through her. She joined the small, shuffling queue in the muddy yard, keeping her head down, her posture hunched to make herself less noticeable, just another anonymous, travel-worn woman. The coach was a cramped, cold contraption, smelling of stale tobacco and damp wool. She squeezed into a corner, drawing her knees up, making herself small, her hand never leaving the concealed pistol. The journey was an eternity of darkness and jolting discomfort, the coach lanterns casting swaying, nightmarish shadows on the faces of her silent companions. She didn't sleep, she watched, every sense tuned to the rhythm of the wheels, every stop a fresh spike of anxiety as new passengers boarded, each one a potential enemy until proven otherwise. Dawn was a dirty smudge on the horizon when the sprawling, stinking, magnificent chaos of London finally enveloped the coach. The noise was a physical assault after the silence of the moors and the tense quiet of the carriage, the clatter of countless wheels and hooves on cobbles, the cries of hawkers, the general cacophony of a city of millions waking up. She alighted into the bustling inn-yard, disoriented and dizzy with exhaustion and hunger, but her purpose was a lodestone, pulling her forward. She knew Renshaw's address in Mayfair, a beacon of order in the chaotic metropolis. Hiring a hackney cab was a risk, could the driver be bribed? Was she walking into another trap? But walking was impossible, her strength was fading, her body trembling with fatigue and the aftermath of adrenaline. She gave the address, her voice hoarse, and sank back into the musty interior, watching the teeming streets through the grimy window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. London was A.W.'s domain. He moved in these circles, wielded influence here. Every finely dressed man in a passing carriage, every footman lounging outside a grand house, could be his agent. The cab finally pulled up before a handsome, imposing townhouse, its pristine white stone a world away from the mud and blood of the ditch. Eleanor paid the driver and stumbled out, her legs weak, her vision blurring for a moment before she steadied herself against the iron railing, taking a deep, shuddering breath. This was it, the end of the road. She marched up the steps, her head high, ignoring the disapproving glance of a passing maid, and lifted the heavy brass knocker, letting it fall with a decisive thud that echoed in the quiet, affluent square. The door was opened by a stern-faced butler, his gaze sweeping over her bedraggled, mud-stained form with profound disdain. "State your business," he intoned, making it clear she was not the sort of person typically received at this address. "I am Lady Eleanor Thorne," she said, her voice, though tired, carrying an authority forged in desperation that made the butler blink. "I must see Sir William Renshaw immediately. It is a matter of the gravest national urgency. Tell him it concerns the Antwerp shipment and the initials AW." The use of the specific, damning phrase and the sheer, desperate intensity in her eyes cut through the butler's protocol. He hesitated only a moment before stepping back. "Wait here." He disappeared into the depths of the house. Eleanor stood in the grand foyer, her wet clothes dripping on the polished marble floor, her body trembling with a combination of cold, exhaustion, and the terrifying hope that she had finally reached safety, that the long, bloody nightmare was about to end. Minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed, and Sir William Renshaw himself appeared, his usual composure shattered, his face pale and drawn, still in his dressing gown. "Lady Eleanor. My God, what has happened? We heard there was an incident on the road, but the reports were confused." His words cut off as he truly took in her appearance, the mud, the tears in her clothes, the wild, grief-stricken fury in her eyes. "Captain Thorne?" he asked, his voice tight with dread. "They ambushed us," Eleanor said, the words ripped from her, raw and painful. "They knew we were coming. They were waiting. They shot Marcus. He fell. I don't know if I had to run." She took a step forward, her gaze locking with his, the full force of her will and her pain blazing in her gray eyes. "But I saw him, Sir William. I heard his voice. I know who AW is." Renshaw's face went ashen. Who? The name, the face she had finally placed from the depths of memory and social connection, fell from her lips, a whisper that held the weight of a death sentence. Algernon Whitworth. The shock on Renshaw's face was absolute, followed by a dawning, horrified understanding. Algernon Whitworth. A pillar of the establishment, a respected member of Parliament, a man known for his charitable works and his quiet, unimpeachable integrity. A man who moved in the same rarefied circles as Renshaw himself. A man whose influence was vast and deeply entrenched. "Good God," Renshaw breathed, staggering back a step as if physically struck. "Whitworth. It's not possible, the implications." "It is possible," Eleanor insisted, her voice gaining strength, the truth her only weapon. "He was there. He gave the order. He said my name. He wanted me silenced. The initials in the ledger, the diverted payment, it was him. He wasn't a victim of Vance and Kane, he was their silent partner, their protector in the highest circles. He must have had your clerk omit the entry, or intercepted the information. He knew we were coming because he is one of you." The horrifying truth of it settled over the grand foyer. The enemy wasn't just a foreign agent or a common criminal, he was one of their own, a man who sat in the halls of power, a man with the means to bury secrets forever. Renshaw's expression hardened, the shock replaced by a cold, grim determination. He was a justice of the king's bench, and the law, however deeply it had been betrayed, was his domain. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You are not safe here. Not anywhere in the city. I have a safe room. We must act, and act now, before he realizes you have reached me." He led her quickly through the house, down a back staircase, into a windowless, book-lined study, locking the door behind them. "You are certain?" "Beyond any doubt. I am certain," Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. "I saw him. I heard his voice. I remember the ledger." Renshaw nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "Then the game is even more dangerous than we imagined. To move against Whitworth, it must be done with irrefutable evidence, with the utmost secrecy, and with force he cannot countermand." He moved to a desk, unlocking a drawer and pulling out a heavy, ornate box. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a pair of beautifully crafted dueling pistols. He loaded one with swift, practiced movements and offered it to her. "I suspect you may have need of this before this day is out. Can you use it?" Eleanor took the pistol, its weight and balance far superior to the one Marcus had given her. "Aim for the center. Squeeze, don't pull," she recited, Marcus's ghost guiding her hand. Renshaw gave a grim, approving nod. "Good. Now, we wait. I will send word to the only men I trust implicitly. We will not leave this house until we have a plan to bring Algernon Whitworth to justice." He looked at her, his gaze filled with a newfound respect and a shared, fierce resolve. "You have been incredibly brave, Lady Eleanor. The debt the crown owes you is immeasurable." Eleanor said nothing. She didn't care about the crown's debt. She cared about justice. She cared about Marcus. And as she stood in the quiet, secure room, the loaded pistol cool in her hand, she knew the final, most dangerous move was yet to be made. They were no longer just exposing a secret, they were declaring war on one of the most powerful men in England. And she, Eleanor Thorne, was ready for the battle. The silence in Sir William Renshaw's secure study was heavier than any Eleanor had ever known, thick with the weight of the named betrayal and the ticking clock of impending confrontation. The elegant pistol felt like an extension of her own fury, its polished wood and cold steel a stark contrast to the luxurious, book-lined room that felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. Renshaw had dispatched his most trusted messenger, a grim-faced man with the eyes of a veteran, to summon allies from the Horse Guards, men whose loyalty was to the crown above any political faction. But every second that passed was a lifetime in which Algernon Whitworth could be consolidating his power, spinning his webs, or worse, discovering her location and moving against them. Eleanor paced the small space, her body thrumming with a nervous energy that had nowhere to go, the image of Marcus's fall replaying behind her eyes each time she closed them. She had told Renshaw everything, the words spilling out in a cold, precise torrent, the ambush, the familiar voice, the shot, the desperate flight. Renshaw had listened, his face growing grimmer with each detail, the magnitude of the corruption laid bare staining the very air. Suddenly, a frantic knocking at the study's hidden door, a prearranged signal from Renshaw's butler. Renshaw drew his own pistol, motioning for Eleanor to take cover behind the large oak desk. He unlocked the door a crack. The butler's voice, strained and urgent, whispered through the opening. "Sir William, a rider, from Magistrate Denham in Yorkshire. He's half dead from the ride, insists on seeing you immediately. He says it's about Captain Thorne." Eleanor's heart stopped. She surged from behind the desk, ignoring Renshaw's warning gesture. "Let him in." The butler stepped aside, and a man stumbled into the room, coated in mud and reeking of sweat and exhausted horse. It was one of Denham's younger guards, his face pale and etched with pain and exhaustion. He swayed on his feet, clutching a sealed, grimy dispatch case. "Sir, my lady," he gasped, his breath ragged. "After the ambush, we searched, found the captain, alive, just." The words were a lifeline, a bolt of pure, shocking lightning through the oppressive gloom. Eleanor swayed, gripping the desk for support, a sob of sheer, undiluted relief choking her. "Alive? Where is he?" Renshaw demanded, taking the dispatch case and breaking the seal. "Thornfield, sir. Badly wounded. Lost a lot of blood. Took a ball high in the chest, near the old injury. But he's tough. He was conscious long enough to be damnably specific." The guard's eyes found Eleanor's, filled with a mixture of pity and awe. "He said to find you, my lady. He said to tell you. The hawk circles the dovecote. Remember the game. And he said to give this to Sir William." Renshaw was already scanning the single sheet of paper within the case, his eyes widening. "Good God," he breathed. Thorne wasn't just shot. He was close enough to hear them. He heard Whitworth give orders before he lost consciousness. He names him. And he provides the missing piece, the location of Whitworth's private study in his Mayfair home. He says the proof we need isn't in ledgers, it's in a hidden compartment in the desk. Journals. Letters in his own hand. The true scale of it. The revelation was stunning. Marcus had not only survived, he had fought on, even from the brink of death, delivering the crucial intelligence that could turn the tide. His message, "The hawk circles the dovecote," was a desperate warning. Whitworth knew the dovecote, Renshaw's secure house, might be compromised. He was already moving to surround them, to silence them for good. The game had just escalated dramatically. As if on cue, a new sound penetrated the room. Not a knock, but the distant, ominous crunch of gravel under many boots, the subtle shift in the air that signaled a perimeter being breached. Renshaw's face went taut. "They're here. Whitworth's men. He's not waiting for shadow games, he's coming for us directly." He moved to a section of the bookshelf, pressing a hidden mechanism. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. "This leads to the mews behind the house. It comes out in a stable 2 streets over. Go. Now. Take the guard with you. Get to the Horse Guards. Use my name. Show them this." He shoved Thorne's dispatch into her hands. "I will hold them here as long as I can." Eleanor stared at him, aghast. "I won't leave you to them. You must." Renshaw's voice was fierce, uncompromising. "You are the witness. You carry the evidence. Thorne's survival and his message change everything. Now go." The sound of the front door being forced open, splintering under a heavy blow, echoed through the house. There was no more time. The young guard, galvanized by the urgency, grabbed Eleanor's arm. "This way, my lady." She cast one last, desperate look at Renshaw, who gave her a curt, final nod, already turning to face the door, his pistol raised. Then she was in the passage, the panel sliding shut behind her, plunging them into absolute darkness. The guard led the way, his hand on the wall, moving with a sure-footedness born of desperation. The passage was cold and smelled of damp earth and rats. They stumbled forward, the sounds of shouting and a single, sharp pistol shot from within Renshaw's house echoing faintly behind them, a grim soundtrack to their flight. They emerged, blinking, into a dusty, empty stall in a quiet mews, the early morning light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. The guard peered out cautiously. "Clear," he whispered. "The horse guard's barracks is a mile east. We need to move quickly and quietly." They slipped into the labyrinthine back alleys of Mayfair, a world of service entrances and overflowing ash bins, a stark contrast to the grand squares and avenues just streets away. Eleanor moved like a phantom, her senses heightened, every shadow a threat, every sound a potential alarm. The guard, to his credit, was sharp and resourceful, avoiding main thoroughfares, his hand never far from the hilt of his knife. They were 2 blocks from the stark, imposing bulk of the horse guards building when they saw them. 4 well-dressed but hard-faced men fanning out at the end of the alley, blocking their path. Whitworth's net was closing, his men everywhere. "Back," the guard hissed, shoving Eleanor into a recessed doorway. But it was too late. They had been seen. The men started towards them at a quick, purposeful walk. The guard drew his knife, his face set in a grim mask. "Run, my lady. That way." He pointed down a narrow, dank passage to the right. "I'll hold them." "No." Eleanor protested, but he was already moving, launching himself at the lead man with a fierce cry. The alley erupted into a brief, brutal struggle. Eleanor didn't run. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the guard fight valiantly against impossible odds, buying her time with his life. Then, the cold fury returned, washing away the fear. She raised the pistol Renshaw had given her. "Aim for the center. Squeeze, don't pull." She took a breath, her hands steadying. She aimed not at the men grappling with the guard, but at the one hanging back, the one who looked like he was in charge, who was drawing a pistol of his own. She squeezed the trigger. The report was deafening in the confined space. The man cried out, clutching his shoulder, his own shot going wide and sparking off the cobbles. The surprise of the attack gave the guard an opening. He hamstrung one of his opponents with a vicious slash of his knife. In the confusion, Eleanor turned and ran down the narrow passage the guard had indicated, the sounds of the fight echoing behind her. She burst out onto a slightly broader street, the majestic white stone of the horse guards building looming at the end of it. She ran, her breath sobbing in her chest, her legs burning, not looking back. She sprinted up the broad steps, past the 2 famously immobile cavalrymen on their horses, their faces betraying no emotion at the sight of a disheveled, wild-eyed woman clutching a pistol. She slammed through the main doors into a grand, bustling hall filled with officers and clerks. "Sir William Renshaw," she screamed, her voice cutting through the formal hum of activity, holding up the blood-stained dispatch. "Treason. Algernon Whitworth. I have proof. He's trying to kill me." The hall froze. All activity ceased. Every eye turned to her. For a moment, there was only the sound of her ragged breathing. Then an senior officer, his face a mixture of shock and dawning alarm, stepped forward. "Secure the doors. You, madam, come with me. Now." As she was led away, surrounded by a sudden phalanx of stunned but efficient soldiers, she knew the first battle was won. She had reached the heart of the crown's power. The evidence was in her hand. Marcus's message had been delivered. The final, public reckoning with Algernon Whitworth was about to begin, and she, Eleanor Thorne, was no longer a fugitive but the accuser. The dangerous game was entering its endgame, and the board was finally set for justice. The stark, formal office within the Horse Guards building was a world away from the muddy ditch and the blood-soaked chaos of the ambush, yet the tension within it was just as lethal, humming in the air like a plucked wire as Eleanor stood before a hastily convened circle of senior officers, their uniforms immaculate, their faces a mixture of skepticism, shock, and dawning horror as she laid out the truth with a cold, unshakable clarity that brooked no argument, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and strain but unwavering, her posture straight despite her torn, mud-caked clothes, the grimy, blood-stained dispatch from Marcus held in her hand like a holy writ, the elegant pistol from Renshaw now resting on the table between them, a silent testament to the violence that had dogged her steps. She told them everything, from the hidden entry in the ledger and the ominous initials AW, to the ambush, the sound of Algernon Whitworth's cultured voice giving the kill order, Marcus's sacrifice, her flight, Renshaw's protection and his likely capture or worse, and finally, Marcus's desperate, life-and-death message from Thornfield, the hawk circling the dovecote, the hidden proof in the Mayfair study. She watched as the names, Vance, Finch, Kane, and now Whitworth, sank in, the sheer, unimaginable scale of the betrayal turning the senior officers' faces ashen. This was not some distant conspiracy, it was a rot at the very heart of their own world, a respected member of parliament, a man who broke bread with them at their clubs. The evidence in her hand, corroborated by Thorne's message and her own undeniable, first-hand account, was irrefutable. The officer in charge, a stern-faced general with ice-blue eyes named Sterling, finally spoke, his voice gravelly with grim resolve. "That is enough," he stated, the words falling like a gavel. "Lady Eleanor, you have done this nation a service beyond measure. Your courage is staggering." He turned to his subordinates, his orders sharp and immediate. "Dispatch 2 troops to Sir William Renshaw's residence immediately. Secure the area and free him if possible. And you," he pointed to a captain, "assemble a detail. We are paying a visit to Mr. Algernon Whitworth's home. We will see this hidden compartment for ourselves." He looked back at Eleanor. "You will accompany us, Lady Eleanor. Your identification may be necessary." The ride to Whitworth's Mayfair residence was a silent, armed procession, the clatter of the horses' hooves on the cobbles a grim drumbeat of impending justice. Eleanor sat in a closed carriage flanked by cavalry, her heart a frantic mix of fear, fury, and a desperate, fragile hope that had bloomed anew with the confirmation that Marcus lived. He was alive, wounded, perhaps gravely, but alive. That knowledge was a shield against the terror of what they were about to do. The carriage halted before a magnificent townhouse even grander than Renshaw's, its facade a masterpiece of Georgian elegance, its windows dark and seemingly innocent. General Sterling did not bother with the doorbell. He nodded to a burly sergeant, who promptly used a rifle butt to shatter the lock. They poured into the opulent foyer, startling a sleepy-looking footman who was immediately subdued. "Algernon Whitworth, by order of the Crown, you are to present yourself." Sterling's voice echoed through the silent house. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a door on the first-floor landing opened. Algernon Whitworth stood there, impeccably dressed as if for a day at Parliament, his face a mask of affronted dignity. But Eleanor saw the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the frantic calculation in his eyes. "General Sterling, what is the meaning of this outrageous intrusion?" "The meaning, Whitworth, is treason," Sterling said coldly, his voice cutting through the man's bluster. "We have testimony. We have evidence. And we have a warrant to search these premises." Whitworth's eyes flickered to Eleanor, standing beside Sterling, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of pure, venomous hatred before the polite facade slammed back into place. "This is preposterous. The testimony of a hysterical woman, clearly unhinged by her recent misfortunes." Eleanor stepped forward, her gaze locking with his, her voice ringing clear and cold in the marble hall. "I am quite sane, Mr. Whitworth. I remember everything. The Antwerp shipment, the diverted payment to the account initialed AW. And I remember your voice in the woods, giving the order to kill me." His composure cracked. "Lies. All of it. We shall see," General Sterling said. "His study. Lead the way." Whitworth was forced to comply, his hands clenching at his sides. The study was a temple to power and refinement, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, rich leather, a magnificent mahogany desk. "Now, Lady Eleanor," Sterling said. Captain Thorne's message mentioned a hidden compartment. Eleanor approached the desk, her heart pounding. She ran her hands over the smooth wood, searching for a seam, a trigger. Whitworth watched, a sneer on his lips, confidence returning. "This is a farce. There is nothing here." But Eleanor remembered Marcus's words, his soldier's eye for detail. She looked at the carved lion's head that formed the central drawer pull. It seemed slightly off-center. She pressed it, not pulling, but twisting. It gave with a soft click. A narrow panel at the side of the desk slid open silently. Whitworth's face went deathly pale. Inside the compartment lay a slim, leather-bound journal and a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. General Sterling stepped forward, pulling them out. He opened the journal, scanning a few pages, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. He then glanced at one of the letters, his jaw tightening. He looked up at Whitworth, his eyes like chips of flint. "Algernon Whitworth, you are under arrest for high treason, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of a Crown witness." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Whitworth's dignified facade crumbled completely. "You don't understand. The power, the influence I wield. You cannot touch me. We already have, Sterling said coldly, nodding to his men, who moved to secure Whitworth in irons. As he was led away, sputtering threats and promises of ruin, another officer rushed in. General, word from Renshaw's house. There was a struggle, but we found him. He's wounded, but alive. Whitworth's men are in custody. Relief, so potent it made her lightheaded, washed over Eleanor. Renshaw was alive. The final thread was tied. The Viper was caught. The journey back to Yorkshire was a blur, a strange, dreamlike transition from the heart of London's political storm to the quiet, rolling moors. General Sterling himself provided an armed escort, ensuring her safety every mile of the way. She was no longer a fugitive, but a hero, though the title felt hollow compared to the only thing that truly mattered. Thornfield Hall came into view, and her heart leapt into her throat. Denham himself was waiting on the steps, his usually stern face etched with concern and a new, profound respect. He didn't speak, simply gestured for her to follow him inside, up the grand staircase to a room she knew well. And there, propped up on a mountain of pillows, pale as the sheets but with his brilliant blue eyes open and alert, was Marcus. He was thinner, his face drawn with pain and fatigue, a fresh bandage visible beneath his nightshirt, but he was alive. Truly, wonderfully alive. Their eyes met across the room, and in that look, the entire world, the fear, the pain, the desperate fight, fell away. Denham discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind him. Eleanor crossed the room on trembling legs, her tears finally falling freely, tears of relief, of joy, of a love that had been tested in fire and had emerged unbreakable. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hand reaching out to cup his face, her thumb stroking the familiar line of his jaw. "You," he rasped, his voice weak but filled with a warmth that flooded her soul. "You magnificent, impossible woman. You did it. We did it," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead to his, breathing him in, the scent of soap and linen in him a balm to her shattered nerves. "Your message, it saved everything. I told you," he murmured, a ghost of his old, wry smile touching his lips. "I'm hard to kill." He winced as he tried to shift, and she gently pushed him back against the pillows. "Don't you dare move," she told him then, her voice soft but steady. Everything that had happened after the ditch, the farmer's cart, the mail coach, Renshaw's bravery, the flight through London, the confrontation at the Horse Guards, the raid on Whitworth's study, the satisfying shattering of his arrogance. He listened, his eyes never leaving her face, filled with a pride and a love so deep it made her breath catch. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "So it's over," he said finally. "Truly over." "Yes," she said, weaving her fingers through his. "It's over." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then it seems we finally have that future to build, Lady Thorne." The weeks that followed were a time of slow, sweet healing. Marcus's strength returned day by day, fueled by rest, Mrs. Bellamy's tonics, and Eleanor's constant presence. They talked for hours, not of conspiracies or ledgers, but of crops and tenant roofs and the color to repaint the library, their conversations a gentle, mundane symphony that was more beautiful to Eleanor than any music. The past was acknowledged, a scar they both bore, but it no longer defined them. They had faced the abyss together and walked out of the darkness, hand in hand, their bond tempered into something unbreakable. One sunny afternoon, when Marcus was strong enough to walk in the gardens, they stood by the lake, the water sparkling innocently under the sun. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his blue eyes serious. "Eleanor," he began, his voice strong and clear. "I once asked you to build a future with me amidst chaos and danger. Now, I ask you again, in this peace we fought so hard for. Will you stay with me? Will you be my wife, not just in name, but in this quiet, ordinary, beautiful life?" Eleanor smiled, a true, radiant smile that reached the storm-gray depths of her eyes. She looked at this man, her soldier, her protector, her love, who had given her not just safety, but himself, his trust, his unwavering faith. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. "There is nothing ordinary about a life with you. And I want every single moment of it." He kissed her then, under the wide Yorkshire sky, a kiss that was a promise, a blessing, and a beginning. It was a kiss free from shadows, filled only with the light of the hard-won peace they had carved out together, a testament to the fact that even the most dangerous game could end not just in survival, but in a love that would last a lifetime.